During my daughter's 5th anniversary party, her father-in-law insulted me for 18 minutes in front of 400 guests. So, classic. You're in the wrong place. This isn't the place for someone like you. When I responded, my son-in-law slapped me right there in the middle of the ballroom. No one intervened. No one said a word. I stood there tasting the blood in my mouth, then led my daughter away. Out on the balcony, my phone rang. The screen lit up. It's time. I truly appreciate you spending your time here. Let's connect. Comment below. What city or country are you watching from? I'd love to hear from you. One important clarification. This account features imaginative elements added for narrative impact and educational value. Any parallels to specific people or settings are purely by chance. My focus is on the meaningful lessons within courage, family protection, and standing up against wrongdoing. They say you can measure a man's success by the company he keeps. That night, surrounded by 400 of Boston's finest, I realized I'd failed at the one measure that mattered most: protecting my daughter from wolves in tailored suits. The Fairmont Copley Plaza loomed above me like a gilded fortress as I stepped out of my 15-year-old Ford pickup. Friday, October 18th, 2024, 7 o'clock sharp. I'd promised Sloan I wouldn't be late. I was already 20 minutes behind. Inside the grand ballroom was everything I wasn't. Crystal chandeliers hung from vaulted ceilings, casting warm light over men in tuxedos and women draped in silk. Champagne flutes clinked like a symphony of excess. The air smelled of money, French perfume, aged whiskey, and something I couldn't name, but knew cost more than my monthly mortgage. I tugged at my navy suit jacket bought off the rack at Macy's 3 years ago for a funeral, too tight in the shoulders, too loose in the waist. My hands, scarred and calloused from 40 years of working wood, looked like they belonged to a different species than the manicured fingers gripping champagne stems around me. Dad! Sloan appeared through the crowd, her ice blue gown shimmering under the lights. Beautiful always had been, but tonight something was off. The smile didn't quite reach her eyes. Those eyes, the same dark brown as her mother's, carried a weariness that made my chest tighten. "Kiddo," I said, pulling her into a hug. She felt smaller than I remembered, fragile. When she pulled back, I searched her face. "You okay?" "I'm fine, Dad." Her voice was bright, practiced, too practiced. "I'm so glad you're here." Before I could press her, a hand landed on her waist. Preston Whitmore materialized beside her, his smile as polished as the gold cufflinks at his wrists. 37, Harvard MBA, Executive Vice President of Whitmore Development. "Garrett," Lassie Preston extended his free hand, grip firm, controlled. "Good to see you." "Preston." I shook his hand, noting how his other hand stayed pressed against Sloane's side. Possessive. Controlling. "Thanks for coming," he continued. "I know this isn't exactly your scene." "Wouldn't miss it," I said. 5 years is a milestone. 25 years ago, I'd promised Sarah, my late wife, Sloane's mother, that I'd always protect our little girl, no matter what. Standing there watching Preston's hand grip my daughter's waist like he owned her, I felt that promise weighing on me like a stone. The evening dragged on. I found a spot near the back, away from the venture capitalists Preston was schmoozing. A server offered champagne. I took it, but didn't drink. "You look like you'd rather be anywhere else." I turned. Bridget Murphy stood beside me, glass of red wine in hand. Early 30s, auburn hair pinned up. Emerald dress, Sloane's college roommate, now a successful event planner. "That obvious," I said. She smiled, but it didn't last. "You're not the only one." I followed her gaze. Sloane stood beside Preston at the head table, nodding politely as an older woman talked at her. Sloane's smile was frozen, her posture stiff. "She's not happy, Mr. Morrison," Bridget said quietly. "She hasn't been for a long time." My jaw tightened. "How long?" "At least a year, maybe longer. She doesn't talk about it, but I see it. The way she flinches when he raises his voice. The way she's stopped taking photos." That last part hit me. Sloane had been passionate about photography since she was a kid. Documentary work, capturing real people, real stories. I hadn't heard her mention a new project in months. Before I could respond, a microphone squealed to life. Preston stood at the front, champagne flute raised. "Ladies and gentlemen, thank you all for being here tonight to celebrate 5 incredible years with my beautiful wife, Sloane." Applause rippled through the crowd. I watched Sloane standing beside him, hands clasped. She wasn't smiling anymore. Preston's speech was polished, practiced full of the right words: partnership, gratitude, love. But his eyes were cold, clinical, like he was delivering a quarterly earnings report, not a tribute to the woman he'd vowed to cherish. When he finished, the room erupted in applause. He kissed her cheek, brief, performative. Then his hand slid back to her waist fingers, pressing just a little too hard. I looked away, my stomach turning. The night wore on. Then around 9:30 I saw him. Nathaniel Whitmore, 68, silver-haired, tailored charcoal suit that probably cost more than my truck. CEO and chairman of Whitmore Development. He moved through the crowd like a king surveying his kingdom, stopping to shake hands, clap shoulders, laugh at jokes I couldn't hear. Then his eyes landed on me. He changed course, cutting across the ballroom with the confidence that comes from never being told no. A few guests noticed their conversations tapering off. "Mr. Morrison," Nathaniel said, stopping a few feet away. His voice was smooth, cultured, laced with amusement or disdain. "Mr. Whitmore," I replied evenly. He smiled. "I don't believe we've had the pleasure of a real conversation. Preston tells me you still work with your hands." "I do." "How quaint." He sipped his scotch, gaze sweeping over my ill-fitting suit, my calloused hands, my scuffed shoes. "Woodworking, isn't it? Custom furniture, cabinetry. Ah, an honest trade. Respectable, I suppose, in its own way." The words were polite, but the subtext was clear. "You don't belong here." A few heads turned, conversations paused. Nathaniel's voice carried just enough to draw attention. "An event like this must be quite overwhelming for someone with your background," he continued. "All these people, all this excess. I imagine it's rather outside your experience." The trap was set. I could feel the eyes on me, curious, amused, pitying, waiting to see how the blue-collar father-in-law would react to being dressed down by Boston's elite. I met Nathaniel's gaze and held it. "You'd be surprised what I've experienced, Mr. Whitmore." His smile faltered just for a heartbeat. Then it returned sharper. "Well," he said, raising his glass, "here's to new experiences." He turned and walked away, leaving me standing in the center of a widening circle of silence. The wolves, I realized, weren't just circling my daughter. They were circling me too. In 62 years, I'd been called worse than quaint. I'd been called a hick, a grease monkey, a grunt. I'd been dismissed, overlooked, underestimated. But when a man insults the work of your lifetime in front of 400 witnesses, he isn't just attacking you. He's testing whether you'll fight back. I should have walked away, but I didn't. It was 9:18 p.m. when Nathaniel Whitmore raised his scotch glass again, his smile widening like a predator who just tasted blood. "You know, Mr. Morrison," he continued, his voice carrying across the ballroom with practiced ease, "I've always admired manual labor. It's so honest, so straightforward. No need for strategy, no need for vision. Just you and your tools, building things for people who can afford them." A ripple of polite laughter spread through the nearby guests. I stood there, hands at my sides, feeling the weight of every eye in the room. "Don't let rich people make you feel small," Garrett Sarah had told me once, decades ago, when a banker had sneered at my loan application. "You're worth 10 of them." I held on to that memory like a lifeline. "Woodworking takes skill," I said evenly, "and patience. 2 things money can't buy." Nathaniel's smile didn't falter. If anything, it sharpened. Of course," he said, waving his glass dismissively. "I didn't mean to imply otherwise. It's just that, well, in my world, we create empires. We shape cities. We build legacies that outlast us." He paused, letting the words hang in the air. "What does a carpenter build? A table, a chair, something that gets replaced in a decade." More laughter. Louder this time. My jaw tightened. Across the room, I caught sight of Sloane. Her face was pale, her eyes wide with a mix of horror and helplessness. She took a step forward, but Preston's hand shot out, gripping her wrist. She froze. I looked back at Nathaniel. His expression was smug, triumphant. He was enjoying this. "I build things that last," I said quietly. "Things that matter to the people who use them. That's more than a lot of empires can say." The laughter stopped. A few heads turned, surprised. Nathaniel's smile thinned. "Touché," he said. Though his tone suggested he didn't mean it, he took a slow sip of his scotch, his eyes never leaving mine. "But let's be honest, Mr. Morrison. You and I both know why you're really here tonight." My stomach tightened. You're here because your daughter married my son." He gestured toward Preston, who stood stiffly beside him, his champagne flute gripped so tightly his knuckles had gone white. Preston married for love, obviously. A romantic, my boy. Always has been. Nathaniel's gaze slid back to me, his voice dropping just enough to feel intimate, conspiratorial. Though, I confess, I'd always hoped for a daughter-in-law with a more suitable lineage, someone from a family that understands our world, our values. The words landed like a slap. But Nathaniel continued raising his glass in mock salute. "We all make compromises for passion, don't we? Preston wanted her, and who was I to stand in the way of true love?" Around us the crowd shifted uncomfortably. A few guests exchanged glances. Others stared at their drinks. No one spoke. I felt the heat rising in my chest crawling up my throat. "He's baiting you," I told myself. "Don't take the bait." But my fists were clenched at my sides. "Sloan," I said slowly, forcing the words through gritted teeth, "comes from a good family, a family that values integrity, hard work, loyalty, things that matter more than a last name." Nathaniel's eyebrows lifted, feigning surprise. "Oh, I'm sure she does," he said smoothly, "and she's a lovely girl, truly. But you have to admit, Mr. Morrison, 5 years is a long time." He paused, letting the weight of the words settle. 5 years and still no grandchildren. No heir to carry on the Whitmore name. People are starting to wonder whether this investment was worth it. The room went silent. I felt the world narrow to a single point, Nathaniel's smug, satisfied face. "Investment." I repeated, my voice low, dangerous. "Well, what else would you call it?" Nathaniel spread his hands, all innocence. "Marriage is a transaction, Mr. Morrison. Preston gave your daughter his name, his wealth, his status. In return, we expected, well, a return, a legacy, children, the continuation of a bloodline. Instead, we've gotten 5 years of," he waved his hand vaguely, "nothing." My vision blurred at the edges. I could hear my pulse pounding in my ears. Behind Nathaniel Preston's face was ashen. He looked like he wanted to disappear into the floor. But he didn't move, didn't speak, didn't defend his wife. Sloan was crying now, silent tears streaming down her face. Bridget Murphy had moved to her side, one hand on her shoulder, but Preston still held her wrists, his grip tight enough to leave marks. I took a step forward. "My daughter," I said, my voice shaking with barely controlled fury, "is not an investment, Mr. Whitmore. She's a human being, a person, something your money clearly hasn't taught you how to recognize." The silence that followed was absolute. 400 people held their breath. Nathaniel's face darkened, his smile vanishing like smoke. For the first time that night, he looked genuinely angry. "Careful, Mr. Morrison," he said softly, his voice cold as a knife. "You're a guest in my world. Don't forget that." "I'm a guest at my daughter's anniversary party," I shot back. "A party celebrating a marriage that, from where I'm standing, looks a hell of a lot more like a prison sentence." Gasps rippled through the crowd. Someone dropped a champagne flute. It shattered on the marble floor, the sound sharp and final. Nathaniel's jaw tightened. His eyes flicked to Preston. "Son," he said quietly, his voice a command. Preston didn't hesitate. He released Sloane's wrist and stepped toward me, his face a mask of cold fury. I held my ground. "Preston," I said, meeting his eyes. "Don't." But he didn't stop. The ballroom fell silent again, the kind of silence that precedes a storm. I could see the tension coiled in Preston's shoulders, the rage simmering just beneath his polished exterior. And then I saw it, his hand already raised. I'd been hit before, bar fights in my 20s, a botched mugging when I was 30. But nothing prepares you for the moment your daughter's husband raises his hand to you, not to shake it, but to strike. I could have blocked it. I'd been trained years ago, back when I worked cases that required more than just spreadsheets and audit trails. My body remembered the reflexes: shift weight, raise forearm, deflect. But I didn't. Because sometimes the best defense is letting your enemy destroy himself. Preston's palm connected with my left cheek with a crack that echoed across the grand ballroom like a gunshot. The chandeliers above us seemed to flicker, or maybe that was just my vision. Pain exploded across my face, sharp and hot, and I tasted copper on my tongue. I didn't fall, didn't stumble. I stood there rooted to the marble floor and met Preston's eyes. For one heartbeat, The ballroom held its breath. 400 people. 400 witnesses. Not a single sound. The silence was absolute. No gasps, no murmurs, no polite coughs to fill the void. Just the hum of the chandeliers and the faint clink of ice melting in forgotten drinks. It was the kind of silence that follows a car crash. That moment when the world stops spinning and everyone realizes something irreversible has just happened. Preston's hand was still raised, frozen in the air, like a monument to his own stupidity. His face, flushed red just seconds ago, had gone pale. His eyes were wide, pupils dilated, and I could see the exact moment panic set in. His mouth opened, closed, opened again. No words came out. Behind him, Nathaniel Whitmore stood motionless, his scotch glass halfway to his lips, his expression caught somewhere between shock and disbelief. Then Sloane screamed, "Dad!" She broke through the crowd like a wave crashing against rocks, shoving past startled guests in their tuxedos and gowns. Her ice blue dress shimmered under the lights as she ran. Her face streaked with tears. She reached me in seconds, her hands flying to my face, her fingers trembling as they hovered near the red mark blooming across my cheek. "Dad, oh my God, are you—" "I'm fine, kiddo," I said quietly, my voice steady despite the fire burning in my jaw. "I'm fine." But she wasn't listening. She spun on Preston, her eyes blazing with a fury I'd never seen before. "What the hell is wrong with you?" she shouted, her voice cracking. "What the hell is wrong with you?" Preston took a step back, his hands raised in a gesture that might have been apology or defense, I couldn't tell. His mouth worked trying to form words. He insulted my father." Preston stammered, his voice thin, desperate. So you hit him." Sloane's voice climbed higher, louder, carrying across the silent ballroom. "You hit my father in front of all these people. Sloane, don't." She shoved him hard, both hands against his chest. He stumbled backward, nearly tripping over a nearby chair. "Don't you dare!" Around us, the crowd began to stir. Whispers rippled through the room like wind through tall grass. "Did he just— Oh my God, someone call security." I saw phones come out, dozens of them, screens glowing in the dim light. People were filming, recording, capturing every second of Preston Whitmore, heir to a Boston empire, assaulting his father-in-law at his own anniversary party. Good. Nathaniel finally moved. He set his scotch down on a nearby table with a sharp clink and stepped forward, his face a mask of controlled fury. "Everyone, please," he said, his voice cutting through the murmurs. "There's been a misunderstanding. There's no misunderstanding," I said, my voice low but clear. Every head in the room turned toward me. "Your son just committed assault in front of 400 witnesses." Nathaniel's jaw tightened. His eyes locked on mine, and for the first time that night, I saw something other than arrogance in his expression. I saw fear. "Mr. Morrison," he began, his tone carefully measured, "I'm sure we can resolve this privately. No need to make a scene." "Too late for that," I said. I looked at Preston, who was still standing there, hands at his sides, his face a study in panic. "You should have thought about that before you raised your hand." I turned to Sloane, gently placing my hand on her shoulder. She was shaking, anger, fear, shock, all rolled into one. Her mascara had run down her cheeks in dark streaks. "Come on, kiddo," I said softly. "We're leaving. But now." She nodded, wiping at her eyes with the back of her hand. I took her arm and began to walk, guiding her toward the ballroom's double doors. The crowd parted like the Red Sea guests, stepping aside, their faces a mix of curiosity, pity, and something else, relief, maybe that they weren't the ones at the center of this disaster. As we passed Nathaniel, I paused, just for a second, just long enough to lean in close, my voice barely above a whisper. "You just activated something you don't understand, Whitmore," I said. "Check the contracts." His eyes narrowed, confusion flickering across his face. But I didn't wait for a response. I kept walking, Sloane's arm in mine, my head held high, despite the throbbing pain in my cheek. We walked through the crowd, past the ice sculptures and the champagne towers, past the women in diamonds and the men in $1,000 suits, out onto the balcony where the October air hit us like a slap of reality. The cold bit at my skin, sharp and clean, washing away the heat of the ballroom. Sloane was trembling. My cheek burned like fire. And somewhere in my jacket pocket, my phone buzzed. I pulled it out. One text message from Mitchell Brennan. My lawyer, the man who'd helped me draft that clause 5 years ago. Brennan, just saw the video. It's time. I looked at Sloane, her face pale in the glow of the city lights. Her eyes red-rimmed and exhausted. She looked so much like her mother in that moment, Sarah who'd made me promise to always protect our girl no matter what. 5 years. I'd waited 5 years for this moment, not because I wanted it to happen, but because I'd been prepared for it. I slipped the phone back into my pocket and put my arm around Sloane's shoulders. "It's going to be okay," I said quietly. "I promise." She looked up at me, tears streaming down her face. "How, Dad?" she whispered. "How is any of this going to be okay?" I smiled, just a little, despite the pain. "Because your husband just made the biggest mistake of his life," I said, "and we're going to make sure he pays for it." The drive from Back Bay to Dorchester took 20 minutes, but that night it felt like crossing between two different worlds. One built on marble and lies, the other built on wood and truth. My old Ford F-150 rumbled through the streets, its engine a low, steady hum that had always reminded Sloane of home. She sat in the passenger seat, silent, her hands folded in her lap. Her face turned toward the window. The city lights blurred past us. First the gleaming towers of Back Bay, all glass and steel and money, then the softer, dimmer glow of streetlights as we crossed into Dorchester, where the houses were smaller, older, built by people who worked with their hands. I didn't try to fill the silence, didn't ask if she was okay. I could see the answer in the way her shoulders hunched forward, the way her breath fogged the window, the way silent tears slipped down her cheeks and dripped onto her dress. Instead, I reached over and gently took her hand, just like I used to when she was a little girl, when I'd pick her up from school and she'd tell me about her day, sometimes with words, sometimes with silence. She squeezed my hand back, her grip, tight, desperate. We drove. The Morrison house sat on a quiet street lined with oak trees, their leaves just beginning to turn gold and orange in the October chill. It was a 2-story wood frame house, painted pale yellow with white trim, nothing fancy but solid. I had built most of the interior myself. Over the years, the cabinets in the kitchen, the bookshelves in the living room, the stairs that creaked on the 3rd step, no matter how many times I tried to fix them. The workshop was on the ground floor off to the side. Even now at 9 o'clock at night, I could smell the faint scent of sawdust and varnish drifting through the air as I unlocked the front door. Sloane stepped inside and stopped, her eyes sweeping over the familiar space. The worn couch where she used to curl up and read, the old coffee table scarred with rings from mugs and glasses, the framed photos on the mantel, her mother Sarah smiling in a sundress. Sloane is a gap-toothed 7-year-old holding a handmade birdhouse, the two of us at her high school graduation. "Nothing's changed," she whispered, her voice hoarse. "Why would it?" I said quietly. "This is your home, kiddo. It always will be." Her face crumpled. She sank onto the couch, burying her face in her hands, and finally let herself cry. Not the quiet, restrained tears from the car, but deep, wrenching sobs that shook her whole body. I sat beside her and wrapped my arms around her, holding her the way I had when she was small and scared of thunderstorms. She buried her face in my shoulder, her tears soaking through my shirt. "I'm sorry," she choked out between sobs. "I'm so sorry, Dad." "Shh, you have nothing to be sorry for. He hit you in front of everyone, and her voice broke. "I married him. I stood up there and promised to love him, and what does that make me?" I pulled back just enough to look at her, my hands on her shoulders. "It makes you human, sweetheart," I said firmly. "It makes you someone who believed in love. That's not a weakness. What happens next, that's where your strength shows." She looked up at me, her eyes red and swollen. Mascara streaked down her cheeks. "But I didn't see it, Dad. I didn't see what he was. What kind of person does that make me?" "It makes you someone who saw the best in people," I said. "Someone who gave someone a chance. That's not a failing, Sloane. That's a gift. The failing is his, not yours." She shook her head, fresh tears spilling over. "But I should have known. I should have listened to me." I cupped her face gently in my hands the way I used to when she was little, and scraped her knee or lost a spelling bee. "You are not responsible for his actions. You are not responsible for his choices. The only thing you're responsible for now is deciding what comes next. And whatever you decide, I'm with you, every step of the way." She stared at me, her breath hitching, her lips trembling. Then she nodded slowly and wiped at her eyes with the back of her hand. "Okay," she whispered. "Okay." I got up and moved to the kitchen, an open space separated from the living room by a low counter, the coffee maker, an old mister. Coffee that had been around since Sloane was in middle school sat in its usual spot. I filled it with water-scooped grounds into the filter and turned it on. The familiar gurgle and hiss filled the silence. Sloane watched me from the couch, her arms wrapped around herself. "You still make it the same way," she said softly. "2 scoops dash of cinnamon," I said. "Just like you like it." A faint, sad smile touched her lips. "Mom used to make it that way." "I know," I said. "She taught me." The coffee finished brewing. I poured 2 mugs, added a splash of milk to hers, and carried them over to the small kitchen table. Sloane stood and joined me, sinking into the chair across from mine. She wrapped her hands around the mug, staring down at the dark liquid like it held answers. For a long time, we just sat there, drinking coffee, not talking. Then Sloane looked up at me, her eyes clearer now, more focused. "What happens next, Dad?" she asked quietly. I reached into the inside pocket of my jacket, the same jacket I'd worn to the Fairmont, now rumpled and stained with her tears, and pulled out a thick manila folder. I'd kept it in a locked compartment under the driver's seat of my truck for 5 years, just in case. I set it on the table between us. "Next," I said slowly, "we make sure you're protected. There's something I need to tell you about your prenuptial agreement. Something I put in there. Something the Whitmores never took seriously." Sloane's brow furrowed. She looked down at the folder, then back up at me. "What do you mean?" I slid the folder across the table toward her. 5 years ago, when you and Preston were getting ready to marry, he insisted on a prenup. Nathaniel's idea, of course. Said it was standard practice for families like theirs. I paused, choosing my words carefully. "I had Mitchell Brennan, my lawyer, review it before you signed, and I had him add a clause, a special provision." "What kind of provision?" Her voice was hesitant, wary. "A grandfather clause," I said, "named after me. It stipulates that if any member of the Whitmore family, any member commits an act of violence against you or your immediate family, you gain certain rights, immediate irrevocable rights." Sloane's eyes widened. "What kind of rights?" I held her gaze. 15% voting control of Whitmore Development, a seat on the board, full veto power over major decisions. I let the words sink in. And tonight, when Preston struck me in front of 400 witnesses, he activated that clause. She stared at me, her mouth slightly open in disbelief and shock warring on her face. You put that in the prenup 5 years ago." "I did. But why?" "You didn't think—" "I hoped I'd never need it," I said quietly. "But I've been around long enough to know that men like Nathaniel Whitmore don't build empires by being kind. And I've seen enough to know that power corrupts. I wanted to make sure that if anything ever happened, if they ever tried to hurt you or control you or silence you, you'd have a way to fight back." Sloane's hands trembled as she pulled the folder toward her and opened it. Inside were legal documents, highlighted sections, annotations, and Mitchell's precise handwriting. She skimmed the pages, her eyes growing wider with each line. "They agreed to this," she whispered. "They didn't read it," I said, "or if they did, they didn't take it seriously. Nathaniel probably thought it was just a feel-good clause, something to make the working-class father-in-law feel important. He never thought it would actually be triggered." I leaned forward, though my voice dropping. "They should have taken it seriously." Sloane looked up at me, her eyes red but no longer defeated. There was something else there now, something sharp, something fierce. "What do we do now?" she asked. I smiled just a little. "Now," I said, "we call Mitchell Brennan, and we make sure the Whitmores understand exactly what they've done. They say the devil is in the details. 5 years ago, I buried a clause so deep in Sloane's prenuptial agreement that Nathaniel Whitmore's lawyers dismissed it as archaic and unenforceable. Last night, Preston Whitmore turned it into the most expensive slap in Massachusetts legal history. The next morning, sunlight streamed through the kitchen windows, warm and golden, painting everything in soft light. It was just after 9. I'd been up since 6, making coffee, frying bacon, flipping pancakes muscle memory from years of weekend mornings when Sloane was a kid. She'd always loved pancakes, still did apparently, because she'd eaten 3 without saying a word. Now she sat at the kitchen table, the manila folder open in front of her eyes scanning the pages of her prenuptial agreement. The agreement she'd signed 5 years ago, 2 weeks before her wedding. The agreement she'd barely read, trusting Preston's lawyers, trusting me, trusting that marriage was built on love, not contracts. Her coffee had gone cold. She hadn't touched it in 20 minutes. I stood at the counter, my own mug in hand, watching her, waiting. Finally, she looked up. "This was in here the whole time." Her voice was quiet, almost disbelieving. "Page 47, I said. Section 12, subsection C. She flipped back through the pages, found it, and read aloud, her voice halting. "In the event that any member of the Whitmore family, including but not limited to the groom, commits an act of physical violence against the bride or her immediate family, the bride shall be granted an immediate irrevocable transfer of 15% voting shares of Whitmore Development Corporation, plus a permanent seat on the board of directors, with full voting rights and veto power over executive appointments." She stopped, stared at the words, then looked up at me, her eyes wide. 15%, she whispered. 15%. I confirmed. "Dad!" Her voice cracked. "Did you plan this? Did you use me as bait?" I set my mug down and pulled out the chair across from her, sitting slowly. "No," I said firmly. "I didn't plan for Preston to hit me. I didn't want it to happen. But I've been around long enough to know that men who grow up with power, men like Nathaniel, men like Preston, they don't always play by the rules. And I wanted to make sure that if anything ever went wrong, you'd have a way out, a way to protect yourself." "But you didn't tell me," she said, her voice rising. "You didn't tell me this was in here. I had no idea. If I'd told you, you would have taken it out," I said quietly. "You would have said, 'Dad, that's too much. That's not fair. Preston would never hurt me.' And you would have been right to think that. You should have been able to trust him, but I couldn't take that chance." Sloane's hands trembled as she set the papers down. "This isn't protection, Dad," she said, her voice shaking. "This is a weapon." I held her gaze. "Sometimes," I said, "protection is a weapon." 5 years ago, Mitchell Brennan and I sat on this same couch, a draft of the prenup spread across the coffee table. It was late, nearly midnight. Sloane was upstairs asleep in her old room, dreaming of flowers and vows and Preston's promises. "They'll never agree to this," Mitchell had said, tapping the clause with his pen. "Nathaniel's lawyers will tear it apart. They'll call it punitive, unenforceable." "They'll agree," I said, "because they won't believe it matters." Mitchell raised an eyebrow. "You think Preston's going to hit you?" "I think men like Nathaniel Whitmore don't build empires by being kind," I said. "And I think sons raised by men like that learn to see the world in terms of power, control, dominance. Maybe Preston's different. Maybe he really loves Sloane, but if he's not..." I paused, choosing my words. "I want her to have options." Mitchell had studied me for a long moment, then nodded. "All right," he said, "but if this ever gets triggered, Garrett, you need to be ready, because the Whitmores won't go down quietly." "I know," I'd said, and I did. There was something in my past, something I hadn't told Sloane yet, that had taught me exactly how men like Nathaniel operated. How they twisted contracts, buried evidence, silenced dissent. I'd seen it before. I'd fought it before. And I'd lost, but this time I'd been smarter. The doorbell rang, pulling me back to the present. Sloane looked up, startled. I stood crossed to the front door and opened it. Mitchell Brennan stood on the porch, briefcase in hand, dressed in a crisp navy suit despite it being a Saturday morning. At 60, he still had the sharp eyes of a prosecutor, the steady hands of a surgeon. We'd known each other for 25 years, since back when I'd worked cases that required more than woodworking skills. "Morning, Garrett," he said, stepping inside. He nodded toward the kitchen. "How's she doing?" "She's processing," I said. Mitchell smiled faintly. "Good, because we've got work to do." We walked into the kitchen. Sloane stood as Mitchell entered, her face a mix of confusion and hope. "Mr. Brennan," she said. "Sloane." Mitchell set his briefcase on the table and opened it, pulling out a tablet. "I've reviewed the video footage from last night. 17 different angles posted on social media by various guests. All of them show the same thing. Preston Whitmore striking Garrett Morrison in full view of approximately 400 witnesses." He turned the tablet toward us. On the screen, a video played on loop. Preston's hand connecting with my face, the crack echoing across the ballroom, the stunned silence that followed. Sloane's breath hitched. "That's irrefutable evidence," Mitchell continued. which means the grandfather clause is now active. Sloan, as of last night at 9:36 p.m., you are the owner of 15% voting shares in Whitmore Development Corporation. 15%. Sloan repeated, her voice hollow. At current valuation, Mitchell said, that's approximately $340 million. Sloan sank into her chair. 340 and the board seat. Mitchell continued, his tone brisk professional. That makes you the second largest voting shareholder after Nathaniel, who holds 21%. Lawrence Whitmore holds 9%. The rest is divided among 6 other board members. Which means, Sloan, you don't just have a settlement, you have leverage. He pulled out a thick stack of documents and set them on the table. Here's what we're going to do. First, we file an immediate motion to enforce the clause with the probate court. Second, we file for a restraining order against Preston, no contact, no communication. Third, we initiate divorce proceedings. And fourth, he paused, meeting Sloan's eyes. We prepare to use your voting power to hold Whitmore Development accountable for every shady deal, every cut corner, every victim they've buried under NDAs and settlements. Sloan stared at him, then at me. This isn't just about the slap, is it? She said quietly. I shook my head. No, kiddo, I said. It's about making sure they never hurt anyone again. Mitchell tapped the tablet screen, pulling up another file. There's more, he said. We've got evidence of financial irregularities, construction site violations, and at least 2 incidents of workplace misconduct that were covered up. But we'll get to that later. Right now, the priority is securing your position. Once you have that board seat, you'll have access to internal records, audit reports, contracts, everything. Sloan's hands trembled as she picked up the documents. What do I do with it? She whispered. What do I do with all this power? I leaned forward, covering her hands with mine. You use it to dismantle their empire, I said, piece by piece, and you make sure they never hurt anyone else the way they hurt you. For the first time since last night, I smiled. Sloan looked at me, then at Mitchell, then back at the tablet screen where Preston's hand struck my face over and over in an endless loop. Okay, she said, her voice steadier now. Okay, what's the first step? Mitchell smiled. The first step, he said, is making sure the Whitmores know exactly what they've activated. My phone buzzed on the counter. I glanced at the screen. Preston Whitmore. 15 missed calls. I picked it up, held it for a moment, then set it back down. He's starting to understand, I said. Sloan's eyes narrowed. Good. When a desperate man comes knocking at your door, you have 2 choices: let him in or make him beg on the porch. I chose the porch. I wanted the neighbors to see. At 3 o'clock that afternoon, I was standing at the kitchen sink, rinsing coffee mugs, when I heard the low rumble of an engine I didn't recognize. I looked out the window and saw it. A black Mercedes S-Class, glossy and pristine, rolling to a stop in front of my house like a sleek predator in the wrong habitat. In Dorchester, where Fords and Hondas lined the curbs, it stuck out like a tuxedo at a barbecue. Preston. I'd been expecting this. I set the mug down, dried my hands on a dish towel, and pulled my phone from my pocket. 2 missed calls from Mitchell Brennan, both in the last hour. I'd called him earlier, told him Preston might show up. Mitchell had advised me not to engage. Let him violate the restraining order, he'd said. Then we call the cops. But I had a different plan. I dialed a number I hadn't used in a while. It rang twice. Garrett. The voice on the other end was rough familiar. Tommy O'Brien, retired Boston PD, now working private security. We'd crossed paths years ago, back when I'd worked cases that required more than spreadsheets and audit trails. Tommy, I said, I need a favor. 2 of them, actually. 20 minutes later, 2 men in plain clothes stood at the edge of my front yard, arms crossed, watching. Ex-cops, both of them guys who owed me. They didn't say a word. Didn't have to. Their presence was enough. I also slipped my phone into my shirt pocket screen, facing out, camera recording. Massachusetts was a 2-party consent state, but Preston had already violated the restraining order by showing up here. If things went south, I wanted evidence. Upstairs, Sloan stood at her old bedroom window curtains, half drawn. I could see her silhouette motionless, watching. Preston climbed out of the Mercedes, dressed in a charcoal suit that probably cost more than my truck. His tie was loose, his hair slightly disheveled, unusual for him. He looked like a man who hadn't slept. Good. He walked up the driveway slowly, his eyes scanning the house, then landing on me as I stepped out onto the porch. I didn't go down the steps, didn't meet him halfway. I stayed on my porch on my territory and made him come to me. He stopped at the bottom of the steps, hands in his pockets, his face a careful mask of contrition. "Garrett," he said, his voice low-measured. "Can we talk?" "We're talking," I said. He glanced at the two men standing at the edge of the yard, then back at me. "Privately, no." His jaw tightened. For a moment the mask slipped and I saw a flicker of anger in his eyes. Then it was gone, replaced by something softer, rehearsed. "I came to apologize," he said. "What I did last night, it was inexcusable. I lost my temper. I wasn't myself. He stopped, swallowed. "I'm sorry, Garrett. I'm truly sorry." I didn't move, didn't speak, just stared at him. He shifted his weight uncomfortable under my gaze. "I know I hurt you. I know I hurt Sloan, but we can fix this. We don't have to destroy our family over one mistake." "One mistake," I repeated flatly. "Yes." He took a step forward, his voice gaining urgency. "One moment of anger, that's all it was. I've already spoken to a therapist. I'm committed to changing, to being better. Oh, for Sloan, for us." "There is no us, Preston," I said quietly. "Not anymore." His face darkened. "You don't get to decide that." "You're right," I said. "I don't. Sloan does. And she's made her decision." "She's confused," Preston said quickly. "She's upset. She's not thinking clearly. If I could just talk to her—" "No." The word landed like a hammer. Preston flinched. "No," he repeated, his voice rising. "She's my wife, Garrett. I have a right." "You have no rights," I cut in. "Not anymore. You signed them away the moment you raised your hand to me. You activated a clause in your prenuptial agreement. Sloan now owns 15% of Whitmore Development. She has a board seat. And as of this morning, there's a restraining order with your name on it. You're not supposed to be here. You're not supposed to contact her. You're not supposed to come within 500 feet of her." Preston's face went pale, then red, then something colder. "You think you're clever?" he said, his voice low, dangerous. "You think you've won." "I think I've protected my daughter," I said. "You've trapped her," Preston snapped. "You've poisoned her against me, turned her into a pawn in your little game." I took a step forward, my hands steady at my sides. "This isn't a game, Preston. This is my daughter's life, and you've proven in front of 400 witnesses that you're not fit to be part of it." His face twisted. The mask was gone now, torn away like paper. "You don't know what you're starting," he said, his voice shaking with barely controlled rage. "My father will crush you. We'll take everything. Your business, your licenses, your house. We'll bury you so deep you'll never see daylight again." "Try," I said simply. "But every move you make, I'll be 3 steps ahead, because unlike you, Preston, I've spent 5 years preparing for this." He stared at me, breathing hard. Then he laughed a sharp, bitter sound. "She's my wife," he said, his voice cracking. "She belongs to me." I felt something cold settle in my chest. "She's my daughter," I said quietly, "and she belongs to herself. Now get off my property before I call the police for trespassing." For a moment, Preston didn't move. He just stood there staring at me, his chest heaving, his fists clenched at his sides. Then slowly he turned and walked back toward the Mercedes. But before he got in, he stopped, looked up, at the second-floor window, at Sloan. She was still standing there, half hidden behind the curtain. For a moment, their eyes met, and then she stepped back, disappearing into the shadows. Preston's face changed. It twisted into something I'd never seen before, something not quite human, something that made the hair on the back of my neck stand on end. "You're making a mistake, old man," he said, his voice low, venomous. "A very expensive mistake." He climbed into the Mercedes, slammed the door, and drove off. I stood there on the porch watching the car disappear down the street, my heart pounding. Tommy O'Brien walked over, hands in his pockets. "You good?" he asked. I nodded. "Yeah, thanks for coming. Anytime?" He glanced down the street where the Mercedes had vanished. "That guy's got bad energy, Garrett. Watch yourself." "I will." Tommy and his partner left. I stood there for a moment longer, then pulled my phone from my pocket. The video was still recording. I stopped it. Saved it, sent it to Mitchell Brennan with a single text. "He violated the restraining order. Here's proof." Then I went inside, Sloane was standing at the bottom of the stairs, her arms wrapped around herself. Her face was pale, but her eyes were clear. "Are you okay?" she asked. I crossed the room and pulled her into a hug. "I'm fine, kiddo," I said. "Are you—" She didn't answer right away. Then quietly she said, "I don't love him anymore. Dad, I don't think I have for a long time." I held her tighter. "Good," I said, "because he doesn't deserve you." She pulled back, looked up at me. "What happens now?" I thought about Preston's face, that twisted, inhuman expression, the way he'd looked at her. "Now," I said, "we make sure he can't hurt you. Ever." That night I couldn't sleep. I kept replaying that moment in my mind. Preston looking up at Sloane's window, his face contorting into something monstrous. This wasn't just about money or pride anymore. This was about control, and Preston Whitmore didn't give up control easily. Every man has a past he'd rather not explain. Mine involved federal badges, offshore accounts, and the kind of people who smile while calculating how to destroy you. Sloane had never asked. That night she did. That evening after dinner, leftover pancakes and coffee because neither of us had much appetite, I went down to the workshop. It was my refuge, the place where I could think, where the world made sense again. Wood didn't lie. Wood didn't manipulate. You treated it with respect, and it gave you something beautiful in return. I was sanding a table I'd been working on for weeks, a walnut dining set for a client in Cambridge. The repetitive motion back and forth, grain by grain, helped clear my head. The workshop smelled of sawdust and varnish, familiar and grounding. The overhead light cast a warm yellow glow, softening the edges of the room. I heard footsteps on the stairs. Then Sloane appeared in the doorway, arms wrapped around herself, still wearing the same clothes from this afternoon. She looked smaller somehow, younger. She crossed the room and hoisted herself up onto the workbench, legs dangling just like she used to do when she was 10 years old, and wanted to talk to me while I worked. Back then, she'd ask me about school, about friends, about whether I thought the world was fair. I'd answer as honestly as I could, sanding wood, while she swung her feet and listened. Tonight, she didn't swing her feet. "Dad," she said quietly, "how did you know I didn't stop sanding? Know what, kiddo? How did you know to put that clause in the prenup? How did you know it would work?" I paused, the sandpaper still in my hand. Then I set it down on the table and looked at her. "Because I've seen men like Nathaniel before," I said, "and I know how they think." "But how?" she pressed. "You're a carpenter, Dad. You've always been a carpenter." I wiped the sawdust from my hands with a rag and leaned against the workbench beside her. "That's not entirely true," I said. She frowned. "What do you mean?" I took a breath. This was a conversation I'd been avoiding for 25 years. But if we were going to take on the Whitmores, really take them on, she deserved to know who I was, who I used to be. 25 years ago, I began. Before you were born, I wasn't a carpenter. I was a forensic accountant for the FBI. Sloane's eyes widened. "What?" "I tracked money," I said. "Dirty money. Offshore accounts, shell companies' wire, transfers that disappeared into the Cayman Islands and never came back. I worked white-collar crime cases, fraud, embezzlement, bribery. The kind of crimes that don't make headlines because the people committing them are too rich, too powerful, too connected." She stared at me, speechless. "I was good at it," I continued. "I'm really good. I could look at a balance sheet and see the lie underneath. I could trace a dollar through a dozen shell companies and find the person who'd stolen it, and I helped put a lot of bad people behind bars." "Why didn't you ever tell me?" she whispered. "Because I left that life behind," I said. "When your mother died when you were still just a baby, I realized I couldn't do both. I couldn't be a father and chase criminals across the country. So I quit, walked away, opened this shop, raised you." Sloane's voice was barely audible. "And Nathaniel." I nodded slowly. 25 years ago, I worked a construction fraud case in New York. Nathaniel wasn't the primary target, but his company came up. Whitmore Development had connections to a contractor who was laundering money through building projects. We couldn't prove Nathaniel was directly involved, but I saw the patterns. The way he structured deals, the way he buried liabilities, the way he made problems disappear. I paused, choosing my words carefully. "Men like Nathaniel," I said, "they don't just break the law, they bend it. They find the loopholes, the gray areas, the fine print. They hire lawyers who are smarter than prosecutors, and they smile the whole time because they know they're untouchable." Sloane's hands gripped the edge of the workbench. So, when I told you I was going to marry Preston, I suspected, I admitted, so I did some digging. Not a full investigation, I didn't have the resources for that anymore, but enough to know the Whitmores were dangerous. Enough to know Preston was his father's son. "Why didn't you stop me?" her voice cracked. "Because you were in love," I said gently. "And I couldn't prove anything. I couldn't show you hard evidence. All I had were instincts, patterns, suspicions. And I knew that if I tried to stop you, you'd resent me. You'd marry him anyway. Just to prove I was wrong." She looked down at her hands. "So, you put that clause in the prenup." "I gave you an exit strategy," I said. "If Preston turned out to be a good man, you'd never need it. The clause would sit there buried in the fine print, harmless. But if he turned out to be like his father," I met her eyes, "then you'd have a way out. That clause wasn't a trap for them, Sloane. It was a parachute for you." For a long moment she said nothing, then quietly, "You've been protecting me my whole life, even from things I didn't know existed." "That's what fathers do," I said. She wiped at her eyes, then looked up at me, her expression shifting from sadness to something harder, sharper. "Dad," she said slowly, "if you know how to investigate people like them, can you find evidence of what they've really done?" I picked up the sandpaper again, more to give my hands something to do than anything else. "I can," I said. "But once we start down that road, there's no going back. They'll come after us with everything they have. Legal teams, private investigators. They'll try to bury us." Sloane slid off the workbench and stood in front of me, her arms crossed, her jaw set. My little girl, who used to be afraid of thunderstorms, was looking at me with eyes of steel. "Good," she said. "Let them come. I want to know who I married. I want to know what he's capable of." I should have warned her that there are some truths you can't unknow. Some doors that once opened can't be closed. But I didn't. Because 3 days later, we'd discovered that Preston was capable of things far worse than either of us had imagined. Walking into that boardroom felt like walking into a den of wolves. Except this time, my daughter wasn't the prey. She was the one holding the gun. Friday, October 25th, 10 a.m., Whitmore Development, tower to 45th floor. The boardroom was everything you'd expect from a company worth billions. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking Boston Harbor. A table made of dark mahogany that could seat 20 leather chairs that probably cost more than my truck. The air smelled faintly of leather and expensive cologne. Everything in this room was designed to intimidate. I sat in the corner near the door on a small chair reserved for observers. I wasn't a board member, I had no voting rights. But Mitchell had arranged for me to attend as Sloane's advisor, a technicality that Nathaniel couldn't refuse without looking petty. Sloane sat at the table 3 seats from the head, her hands folded in front of her. She wore a navy suit, Mitchell's idea, and her hair was pulled back in a tight bun. She looked older than 33, more composed, but I could see the tension in her shoulders, the way her knuckles were white where her hands pressed together. The night before, Mitchell and I had coached her. "Don't explain," I'd told her. "Don't apologize, just vote." She'd nodded, but I'd seen the fear in her eyes. This was her first board meeting. Her first time sitting at a table with people who'd spent decades in boardrooms, people who knew how to wield power like a scalpel. Nathaniel sat at the head of the table, exactly where you'd expect. He looked older than he had a week ago, his face gaunt, his eyes shadowed, but his posture was still rigid, still defiant. He wore a charcoal suit and a red tie, the colors of power. He glanced at Sloane once, his expression cold, then looked away. Preston stood against the far wall, arms crossed. He wasn't a board member, he had no voting rights, but as EVP, he was permitted to observe. He stared at Sloane with a mix of fury and something else. Hurt, maybe, or betrayal. It didn't matter. He was a threat, and I watched him like a hawk. Lawrence Whitmore sat 4 seats down from Nathaniel, directly across from Sloane. He was calm, composed, dressed in a gray suit that looked understated, but probably cost $5,000. He caught my eye and nodded once. We'd spoken on the phone 2 days ago. He'd proposed the no-confidence vote, not out of loyalty to Sloane or because he cared about justice. He wanted Nathaniel's job, and Sloane's 15% gave him the leverage to take it. The other 12 board members filed in old money, most of them. 7 men in their 60s, 3 in their 50s, 2 women in their early 50s, and 1 in her late 40s. They nodded politely to Sloane, their faces carefully neutral. Mitchell had briefed me on each of them. Most were investors, silent partners who cared more about stock prices than ethics. 3 were Nathaniel loyalists. The rest were pragmatists who'd vote whichever way the wind blew. At exactly 10:00 a.m., the meeting began. Lawrence cleared his throat. Thank you all for coming on such short notice. I'll get straight to the point. I'm calling for a vote of no confidence in Nathaniel Whitmore as CEO and chairman of Whitmore Development Corporation. A murmur rippled through the room. Nathaniel's jaw tightened, but he didn't speak. Lawrence continued, his voice steady. Over the past week, a series of public events, have severely damaged this company's reputation. Our stock price has dropped 18%. We're facing lawsuits, media scrutiny, and a PR crisis that shows no signs of abating. As fiduciaries, it's our duty to act in the best interest of shareholders. And right now, the best interest of shareholders is new leadership. Nathaniel finally spoke, his voice low, controlled. This is a family matter being exploited by opportunists. Is it? Lawrence said mildly. Because from where I'm sitting, it looks like a criminal matter. Your son assaulted a man in front of 400 witnesses. There's video evidence, a restraining order, divorce proceedings. And now, a shareholder, your own daughter-in-law, holds 15% of this company and a board seat. That's not opportunism, Nathaniel. That's consequence. Nathaniel turned to Sloan, his eyes blazing. You, he said, his voice dripping with venom. You think you can walk in here and tear down what I've built? Sloan didn't flinch. She met his gaze, steady, unflinching. Mr. Whitmore, she said quietly, when your son assaulted my father in front of 400 witnesses, it stopped being a family matter. It became a legal liability, a PR disaster, and a fiduciary problem. I'm not here to tear down anything. I'm here to protect my investment. The room went silent. Nathaniel's face turned red. For a moment I thought he might stand up, might shout, might lose control. But he didn't. He just stared at her, his chest rising and falling, his hands gripping the arms of his chair. Lawrence spoke again. I call for a vote. All in favor of removing Nathaniel Whitmore as CEO, and chairmen say, aye. One by one, hands went up. Lawrence, aye. Sloan, aye. Her voice didn't waver. The woman in her late 40s, aye. 2 of the men in their 60s, aye, aye. It went on. 12 votes in favor. 3 voted against Nathaniel's loyalists, old friends who owed him their fortunes. But 12 was more than enough. The motion passes, Lawrence said. Nathaniel Whitmore is hereby removed as CEO and chairman effective immediately. I nominate myself as interim CEO, pending a full search for permanent leadership. Another vote. 11 in favor, 4 abstentions. It was done. Nathaniel stood slowly, his face a mask. He didn't say a word. He just turned and walked toward the door. Preston pushed off the wall and followed. But before he reached the door, he stopped and turned back. His eyes locked on Sloan. You'll regret this, he said quietly. Not a shout, not a threat screamed across the room, just a cold, quiet promise. Then he left. We walked out of the building in silence. Sloan's face was pale, but her jaw was set. She'd done it. She'd sat in that room, face down Nathaniel Whitmore, and voted him out. Mitchell was waiting for us in the lobby. He pulled me aside, his expression grim. Garrett, he said quietly, the company's ethics committee has decades of reports. If Sloan has board access now, she can request files. And, I said, there's something from 2017, Mitchell said. A construction accident. 2 workers died. The report was sanitized, buried. But if Sloan digs, she'll find it. My blood ran cold. Get me that file, now. Mitchell nodded. I'll have it by tonight. That night, Sloan would open a file that changed everything. Because this wasn't just about our family anymore. It was about the bodies the Whitmores had buried literally to build their empire. They say every empire is built on bones. That morning, sitting at the kitchen table with a yellowed file marked Case 2017-447. I knew exactly how many bones the Whitmores had used to build theirs. Saturday morning, October 26th. The kitchen was quiet, just me and Sloan, coffee on the stove, weak autumn sunlight filtering through the window. Mitchell had delivered the file last night, around 10. I'd stayed up reading it, rereading it, cross-referencing names and dates. By 3 in the morning, I'd known 2 things. First, that this was worse than I'd imagined, and second, that Sloan needed to see it. Now she sat across from me, her hands wrapped around a mug of coffee she hadn't touched. The file lay between us, still closed. "Dad," she said quietly, "you look like you haven't slept." "I haven't," I admitted. She glanced down at the file. "Is it that bad?" "Yes." For a moment she didn't move. Then she reached out, pulled the file toward her, and opened it. The first page was a typed summary, yellowed with age, stamped with the seal of the Massachusetts Department of Labor Standards. OSHA Incident Report, number 2017-447. Date of incident, October 12th. 2017. Location: Seaport District Construction. Site parcel: 3B contractor, Whitmore Development Corporation. Type of incident, trench collapse. Casualties: 2-2. Sloane's eyes scanned the page. I watched her face, saw the moment the words registered. 2 casualties, she whispered. "Keep reading," I said gently. She did. Victims: Thomas Sullivan, 42, laborer; Marcus Webb, 28. Laborer investigation findings. OSHA investigators determined that Whitmore Development Corporation violated federal safety standards, including failure to provide adequate shoring for trenches exceeding 5 feet in depth, failure to conduct daily safety inspections, willful disregard for employee safety protocols. Penalty assessed is moigisdas $75,000 maximum fine resolution. Case settled quietly. Families received private settlements. Non-disclosure agreement signed. Investigation closed. Sloane set the paper down, her hands trembling. "They killed 2 people," she said, her voice flat. "And they paid $75,000. That's nothing." "That's the cost of doing business," I said grimly. For men like Nathaniel, a $75,000 fine is a rounding error. "But the families got settlements," I said, "probably substantial ones. But they had to sign ND-as non-disclosure agreements promising not to talk about what happened, not to sue, not to go public." Sloane's jaw tightened. "So, the Whitmores paid them off?" "Yes." She flipped through the rest of the file. There were copies of settlement agreements redacted but still damning. A faded newspaper clipping from the Boston Globe, October 14th, 2017. 2 die in Seaport construction accident. OSHA investigating. Nothing after that. The story had died. "Dad," Sloane said slowly, "we need to find these families. We need to talk to them." "I know," I said. "I've already asked Mitchell to track them down. But there's something else." She looked up at me confused. I leaned forward. "Sloane, when did you shoot that documentary series, the one about Boston workers?" Her frown deepened. 2017. Why? Which months? Late summer through fall. August, September, October, I think." She paused. "Why are you asking?" I tapped the file. "This accident happened on October 12th, 2017, in the Seaport District." Sloane's face went pale. "Dad, you were shooting at construction sites all over the city that fall," I said, "including Seaport." For a moment, she just stared at me. Then she stood abruptly, nearly knocking over her coffee, and grabbed her laptop from the counter. "I archive everything," she said, her voice tight. "Every shoot, every location, every date." She sat back down, fingers flying over the keyboard. I watched her open folder after folder, navigating through years of work. 2017, she muttered. Documentary, workers, Boston. She clicked through subdirectories. August, September, October. Then she stopped. "Oh my God!" On the screen, a folder labeled Seaport _October 10th to 15th _2017. She double-clicked. Hundreds of files. Thumbnail images filled the screen. Construction sites. Workers in hard hats, steel beams, trenches, scaffolding. Sloane scrolled through them, her breathing shallow. "I was there," she whispered. "I was there. I came around the table, stood behind her, watching over her shoulder. She kept scrolling, image after image, workers, machinery, scaffolding, concrete. Then she stopped. Her hand froze on the trackpad. "Dad," she said, her voice barely audible. Look at this. I leaned in. The photo showed a construction site. A trench maybe 10 feet deep, lined with steel plates, but clearly not properly shored. Workers in the background blurred mid-motion. And in the foreground, sharp and unmistakable, Preston Whitmore. He was wearing a hard hat, a navy suit beneath a reflective safety vest. He stood with 3 other men in suits, older, maybe executives or contractors. Preston was pointing at the trench, his expression serious, authoritative. Like he was giving instructions, Sloan clicked on the image info. Date taken, October 12th, 2017, time 9:47 a.m., location Seaport District Parcel 3B, camera Canon EOS 5D Mark IV, metadata, verified, yes. Sloan's voice cracked. Dad, this is 2 hours before the accident. I stared at the screen, my chest tightening. He was there, Sloan whispered. Preston was at the site, 2 hours before 2 men died. She scrolled back up to the OSHA report, reread the findings. Failure to provide adequate shoring for trenches exceeding 5 feet in depth. Then she looked back at the photo, at Preston pointing into that trench. Dad, she said, her voice shaking. He knew. He had to have known. He was there. He saw the trench. He saw the lack of shoring, and She stopped, her breath hitching. He walked away. He let them keep working. I placed my hand on her shoulder. Sloan, I took this picture, she said, her voice rising. I was there. I photographed my husband at the scene of a crime he helped commit, and I've had this evidence for 7 years without knowing. She covered her mouth with her hand, tears spilling down her cheeks. I could have stopped him, she whispered. If I'd known, if I'd seen. You couldn't have known, I said firmly. You were a photographer doing your job. You didn't know what was going to happen. But I should have. No. I crouched beside her, making her look at me. You were 26 years old taking pictures for a documentary. You weren't an OSHA inspector. You weren't a safety engineer. You had no way of knowing that trench was dangerous. And even if you had, Preston wouldn't have listened. Men like him never do. She wiped at her eyes, her jaw setting. But I have the proof now. Yes, I said quietly. You do. She turned back to the laptop, her hands steadying. How many more photos are there? I don't know, I said, but we're going to find out. For the next hour, we went through every image in that folder. There were over 300 photos. Most were innocuous workers welding pouring concrete framing walls. But 17 of them showed Preston, at the site, pointing, talking, standing beside men who looked like contractors or site managers. And in 3 of them, the trench was visible in the background. The same trench that would collapse at 11:52 a.m., killing Thomas Sullivan and trapping Marcus Webb. Sloan saved each image to a new folder, labeled it evidence_2017, backed it up to 3 separate drives. We need to get this to Mitchell, she said, and to whoever's investigating the Whitmores. We will, I said, but first, we need to understand what we're looking at. These photos prove Preston was on site, but they don't prove he gave the order to ignore safety protocols. We need more. Then we'll find more. But Sloan said, her voice hard. Because if Preston was involved in this, if he helped cover it up, then he's not just a violent man, Dad. He's a killer. I didn't disagree. That afternoon I called Mitchell, told him what we'd found. He was silent for a long moment. Garrett, he said finally, if these photos are real, if the metadata holds up, this changes everything. This isn't just about your family anymore. This is corporate manslaughter. This is a federal investigation. I know, I said. I'll reach out to my contact at the Bureau, Mitchell said. But Garrett, you need to understand, once we open this door, there's no closing it. The Whitmores will come after you with everything they have. Let them come, I said, because my daughter had photographed her husband at the scene of a crime he'd helped commit. And she'd kept that evidence for 7 years without knowing. Now she knew, and now the Whitmores would pay. Before I reveal the fateful evidence Sloan kept for 7 years without knowing, please comment 10 below to let me know you're still following along with me. And please note, the following contains details reconstructed for storytelling purposes. If you want to stop, now is the time. They say a picture is worth 1,000 words. The 247 photos Sloan took that October day in 2017, they were worth 40 years in prison. That afternoon I called Mitchell. We need a digital forensics expert, I said. Now. I know someone, Mitchell replied. Give me 2 hours. By 3 o'clock, Mitchell arrived with Sarah Bennett, a digital forensics specialist he had worked with on corporate fraud cases. She was in her late 30s, dressed in jeans and a blazer, carrying a laptop bag and a hard drive the size of a brick. "Mr. Morrison," she said, shaking my hand. Mitchell briefed me. "You have photos that may be evidence in a 2017 construction accident. Just 247 of them," I said. Sarah sat up at the coffee table in the living room. Sloane sat beside her, pale but focused. I stood behind them, arms crossed. Mitchell paced, taking notes on a legal pad. Sarah plugged in the hard drive, opened Sloane's photo archive, and got to work. For the first hour, she said almost nothing. Just click-scrolled, cross-referenced metadata against GPS coordinates, checked timestamps, examined edit histories. Finally, she sat back. "Good news," she said. "The metadata is intact. Every photo has GPS coordinates that match the Seaport District construction site. The timestamps are sequential and consistent. And there's no evidence of editing, no Photoshop, no filters, no alterations. These are original files straight from the camera." Sloane exhaled, her shoulders sagging with relief. "Which means," Sarah continued, "they're admissible as evidence. If you wanted to take these to court, they'd hold up." Mitchell nodded, scribbling notes. "Good. Now let's figure out what they show." We spread printed copies across the coffee table. 247 images. Most were innocuous workers welding pouring concrete framing walls. But 17 showed Preston, and those 17 told a story. Photo 47. Preston standing with 3 men in suits, investors maybe, or executives. Behind them, the trench, 10 feet deep. Steel plates lining the sides, but no horizontal shoring, no supports, a violation of OSHA regulations. Photo 89. A close-up of the trench entrance. In the background, barely visible. 2 safety signs lying on the ground. Someone had removed them. Photo 103, Dennis Kowalski. The site foreman arguing with Preston. Kowalski's body language was aggressive, arms spread, pointing at the trench. Preston's was dismissive arms, crossed face, impassive. Photo 156, taken at 10:52 a.m., workers descending into the trench. 1 hour before the collapse. Mitchell set down his pen. "This isn't just negligence. This is willful disregard for human life." Preston prioritized impressing investors over worker safety. Sloane stared at the photos, her face tight. He knew the trench wasn't safe, and he let them keep working. "Can we prove intent?" I asked. "Not with these alone," Mitchell said. "But combined with the OSHA report, failure to provide shoring, failure to conduct safety inspections, yes, this is corporate manslaughter." Sarah leaned forward. "There's one more thing. Photo 103, the argument between Preston and the foreman. If we can find Kowalski and get him to testify about what was said, that could be the smoking gun." I nodded. "We'll find him." Then Sloane froze. "Wait," she said quietly. "There's something else." She opened her laptop, navigated to a different folder. Not the documentary archive, her personal photos. "I didn't just shoot for work that day," she said. "I also took pictures for us, for Preston and me." She scrolled through images, casual shots, Boston streets, coffee shops, autumn leaves. Then she stopped. "Oh my God." On the screen, Preston sitting at a restaurant table, champagne flutes, 3 other men in suits laughing, toasting. Preston was smiling, not the polished, professional smile he wore in public, but a genuine grin, relaxed, celebratory. Sloane clicked on the image info. Date. Taken. October 12th, 2017, time 8:47 p.m. She opened her old journal, a small leather notebook she'd kept back then. Flipped to October 12th, 2017, her handwriting neat and careful. Preston celebrating the Seaport deal tonight. He said it was a complicated day, but the deal closed successfully. Investors are thrilled. He's so proud. Sloane's hands trembled. He celebrated. The same day 2 men died, he went to a restaurant, drank champagne, and celebrated over their bodies. Mitchell's face darkened. That's consciousness of guilt. He knew what happened, and he didn't care. Sloane closed the laptop, her jaw set. "We're taking him down. All of them." Mitchell pulled out 2 more documents from his briefcase. Settlement agreements. "I got these from the company's ethics committee files," he said. Thomas Sullivan's family received $1.85 million. Standard wrongful death settlement. He slid the second document across the table. Marcus Webb received $50,000. I stared at the number. $50,000 for what? "Personal injury," Mitchell said grimly. "Webb didn't die. He survived, but barely." He opened his laptop, pulled up a newspaper article from 2018, a small piece buried on page 6 of the Boston Globe. "Construction accident survivor speaks out." There was a photo. Marcus Webb, 28 years old, sitting in a wheelchair, paralyzed from the waist down. The article detailed his lawsuit against Whitmore Development, how the company had argued he violated safety protocols, how his case had gone nowhere, how he'd accepted a $50,000 settlement and a lifetime of disability. "They buried him," I said quietly. "They paid Sullivan's family to keep quiet, and they buried Webb under legal fees and victim blaming." Mitchell nodded. "Webb is still alive, lives in Roxbury, works part-time at a community center." Sloane's voice was steel. "We need to find him. We need to find both families." "We will," I said. "But first we document everything, every photo, every timestamp, every piece of evidence. Because when we go after the Whitmores, we're going to make sure they can't wriggle out of this." That night we worked until 2 in the morning, printing photos, cross-referencing timestamps, building a timeline of October 12th, 2017, 9:47 a.m. Preston at the site with investors. Trench visible, no shoring. 10:52 a.m. workers entering the trench. 11:52 a.m. trench collapse. Thomas Sullivan killed instantly. Marcus Webb trapped for 45 minutes. 8:47 p.m. Preston celebrating at a restaurant. 247 photos. 1 dead, 1 paralyzed, 1 man celebrating, and my daughter who'd carried the evidence for 7 years without knowing. Now she knew, and now the Whitmores would pay. There are doors that change your life forever. 247 Ashmont Street, a modest triple-decker in Roxbury, was one of them. Mitchell had found Catherine Sullivan after 4 days of digging through property records and mail forwarding databases. She'd moved here from Dorchester 2 years after the accident. A quiet shift deeper into Boston's working-class neighborhoods, where rent was cheaper and memories less sharp. The house sat on a narrow street lined with maples shedding their last October leaves. The kind of block where everyone knew your name and no one asked too many questions. I parked the F-150 half a block away, and Sloane sat beside me in silence, her laptop bag heavy on her knees. "You ready?" I asked. She nodded, but her hands were shaking. "What if they hate me?" "They might." I didn't lie to her. "But we're not here to make excuses. We're here to tell the truth." The door opened before we knocked. A young man stood in the doorway, early 20s, broad shoulders, sandy hair cut short, wearing a Bunker Hill Community College engineering sweatshirt. His eyes locked onto Sloane, and his jaw tightened. "You're the wife," he said flatly, not a question, an accusation. "Connor." A woman's voice came from inside, tired but firm. Catherine Sullivan stepped into view, behind her son, a slender woman in her 40s with lines around her eyes that hadn't been there 7 years ago. She put a hand on Connor's shoulder. "Let them in." Connor didn't move. "Mom, you don't have to," I said. "Let them in." Catherine's voice carried the weight of a woman who'd made too many compromises and wasn't going to make another one. Connor stepped aside, still glaring. The living room was small, clean worn. Faded floral wallpaper, a sagging couch with a crocheted Afghan, a coffee table cluttered with Connor's textbooks, statics, and dynamics. Materials science and a stack of bills held down by a coffee mug. On every wall, photos Thomas Sullivan in a hard hat grinning. Thomas with his arm around Catherine on a beach. Thomas hoisting a toddler Connor onto his shoulders. A shrine to a man who should still be here. Catherine gestured to the couch. "Sit." We sat. Connor remained standing, arms crossed, blocking the doorway like a sentry. Sloane set her laptop bag on the floor but didn't open it yet. I leaned forward, elbows on my knees, and met Catherine's gaze. "Mrs. Sullivan, my name is Garrett Morrison. This is my daughter Sloane. I know you don't owe us anything, not your time, not your trust, but we need you to hear what we found." Catherine's expression didn't change. You're the carpenter. I saw you on the news. Your son-in-law hit you at some fancy party. Her eyes flicked to Sloane. And you're married to Preston Whitmore. Sloane said quietly. I'm filing for divorce. Good. Catherine's voice was flat. Doesn't change what happened. No, it doesn't, I said. And nothing we say will bring Thomas back. But what we found might give you something the Whitmores took from you 7 years ago. Connor spoke from the doorway. What money? They already paid us off, made Mom sign a paper saying we'd shut up and go away. An NDA, I said. A non-disclosure agreement. They gave you $1.85 million to stay silent. Catherine's laugh was bitter. $1.85 million sounds like a lot, doesn't it? After taxes, legal fees, funeral costs, it was closer to $1 million. I put half in a trust for Connor's college, the rest gone, medical bills for my mother, mortgage, groceries, car repairs. You know what a dead husband's life insurance pays when the company calls it an accident, $500,000. The rest came from Whitmore Development. And they made damn sure we knew it was a gift, not an obligation. She looked at Sloane. Your husband's lawyers told me if I ever talked about it, they'd take every dollar back and sue me for breach of contract. So, yeah, we shut up. Sloane's face had gone pale. I didn't know. I swear I didn't know, Connor cut in. You were there. You were at that site. I saw your name in the OSHA report, photographer on scene for documentary project. You saw what they were doing. I saw workers, Sloane said, her voice breaking. I saw construction. I didn't know. She stopped, swallowed, opened her laptop with trembling hands. I didn't know what I'd photographed until 3 days ago. She turned the screen toward Catherine and Connor. Photo 47. Preston Whitmore in a yellow hard hat, pointing at an open trench, 3 men in suits beside him, no shoring visible in the frame. Metadata. In the corner, October 12th, 2017, 9:47 a.m. Catherine stared at the screen. Connor took a step closer. That's 2 hours before the collapse, I said quietly. Sloane was there filming a documentary on Boston's construction workers. She took 247 photos that day. She didn't realize what she had until we found the accident report. Sloane clicked to the next image. Photo 89 safety signs removed. Stacked against a fence, Photo 103, Dennis Kowalski. The site foreman gesturing angrily at Preston, face red finger jabbing the air. Photo 156 workers climbing into the trench. No protective equipment 1 hour before the collapse. Catherine's hand rose to her mouth. Connor sank into a chair. They told us it was an accident, Catherine whispered. OSHA said violations, but the report was sanitized. Whitmore paid a $75,000 fine, and it disappeared. They told us Thomas made a mistake, that he shouldn't have been in the trench. He didn't make a mistake, I said. He was ordered into an unsafe excavation by a man who knew it was dangerous and didn't care. Connor's voice was rough. Dad called me that morning. I was in class freshman year at BCC. He left a voicemail. He pulled out his phone, scrolled, tapped. A crackling recording filled the room, a man's voice strained and urgent. Connor, it's Dad. Listen, if something happens today. This job isn't safe. The trench has no shoring, and they're pushing us to finish by noon. I told Kowalski it's not right. But he says Whitmore's breathing down his neck about deadlines. I'm scared, buddy. I love you. Tell your mom I love her. I gotta go. The recording ended. Catherine was crying silently. Sloane had her face in her hands. I saved that voicemail for 7 years, Connor said, his voice shaking. I listened to it every year on October 12th. Every year I wanted to do something. But Mom said the NDA would destroy us, so I did nothing. You're not doing nothing anymore, I said. We're going to break that NDA. We're going to take this evidence to the district attorney and the press, and we're going to make sure everyone knows Thomas Sullivan didn't die in an accident. He was killed by corporate negligence. Catherine looked up, tears streaking her face. They'll come after us. Whitmore has armies of lawyers. So do we, I said, and we have something they don't, the truth. Connor stood abruptly, disappeared into a back room. When he returned, he was holding a small cardboard shoebox. He set it on the coffee table, lifted the lid. Inside, wrapped in a faded Red Sox t-shirt, was a cracked Samsung phone. This was Dad's work phone, Connor said. We found it in his locker after the accident. Battery was dead. I tried to charge it once, but it wouldn't turn on. I kept it anyway. I reached for the phone, held it carefully. The screen was shattered spiderwebs. The case scuffed and dented, but the charging port looked intact. I pulled the cable from Sloane's laptop bag, plugged it into the wall, connected the phone. For 30 seconds, nothing. Then a faint vibration. The screen flickered, a pale green glow. The Samsung logo appeared, pixels struggling through the cracks. A progress bar, recovering data. Catherine leaned forward. Connor's breath caught. Sloane gripped my arm. The screen stabilized. Lock screen, date October 12th, 2017. Battery icon 8%. Notification badges. 3 missed calls, 7 unread messages. I looked at Catherine. Mrs. Sullivan, would you give us permission to recover the data on this phone? She nodded, unable to speak. I set the phone gently on the table, still charging, still glowing. Somewhere in that broken device were text messages, call, logs, maybe even recordings. Evidence that had been sitting in a shoebox for 7 years waiting. And Preston Whitmore had no idea we just found it. Death is final, but sometimes survival is crueler. Marcus Webb survived the trench collapse that killed Thomas Sullivan. What he didn't survive was the Whitmore family's determination to erase him from the story. Mitchell had found Marcus living in a ground-floor apartment in Roxbury, one of those subsidized units with wheelchair ramps and grab bars mandated by the Americans with Disabilities Act. I drove there alone on Friday afternoon. Sloane was still processing the meeting with Catherine and Connor, and I didn't want to overwhelm Marcus with too many faces. Mitchell had warned me. He's cooperative but broken. 7 years of fighting the system will do that. The building was a low brick complex tucked between a laundromat and a corner store, the kind of place where people kept their heads down and their business to themselves. I found Unit 3A at the end of a dimly lit hallway that smelled faintly of disinfectant and microwaved dinners. I knocked twice. Footsteps. No. The hum of an electric wheelchair. The door opened, a crack chain still fastened. A man's face appeared in the gap, gaunt, hollow-eyed, stubble shadowing a jaw that had once been strong. 35 years old, Mitchell's file had said, but Marcus Webb looked 50. If you're from Whitmore's lawyers again, he said flatly. I already signed everything. I got nothing left to give. I'm not from Whitmore, I said. My name is Garrett Morrison. I'm looking into the 2017 Seaport collapse, the one that killed Thomas Sullivan. His expression didn't change. Thomas is dead. I'm the guy who didn't die. What do you want? To hear your story. He studied me for a long moment, then unhooked the chain. The door swung open. Marcus backed his wheelchair into the small living room, and I followed. The apartment was spare functional. A hospital bed in one corner, folded but ready. A small kitchenette with a lowered counter. Medical equipment stacked neatly against the wall. Oxygen tank, shower chair, a tray of pill bottles. On the opposite wall, a corkboard covered in photographs. Marcus in a UMass Boston basketball jersey, mid-jump shot, grinning. Marcus with his arm around a young woman at a beach. Marcus holding a toddler. A life that had been. He wheeled to the center of the room, gestured to a sagging couch. Sit if you want. I'd offer coffee, but I ran out 3 days ago, and disability doesn't hit till Monday. I sat. I'm not here to make your life harder, Marcus. I'm here because the Whitmores destroyed my family too. Welcome to the club. A bitter smile flickered across his face. Yeah. What did they take from you? My daughter's safety, her marriage. 5 years of her life living with a man who hit me in front of 400 people because I wouldn't bow down to his father. Marcus let out a low whistle. Preston Whitmore. I remember him. Slick suit, fake smile, always on his phone. He was the one running that site. He was, I said, and I think he ordered you and Thomas into that trench knowing it wasn't safe. Marcus's hands tightened on the armrests of his wheelchair. You think I know. I was there. Then tell me. He was silent for a moment, staring at the photos on the wall. Then he spoke, his voice flat and distant, like he was reading from a script he'd memorized long ago. October 12th, 2017. We were digging a utility trench for the Seaport Development water, an electrical conduit 12 feet deep, running along the north perimeter. OSHA says any trench over 5 feet needs shoring metal supports to keep the walls from caving in. We didn't have any. Dennis Kowalski, the foreman, told Preston's site manager 3 times that morning, we need to stop until the shoring arrives. The guy I don't even remember his name just kept saying, "Mister, Whitmore has investors touring the site at noon. We need progress to show them." Marcus paused, swallowed hard. Thomas and I were the crew leads. Dennis pulled us aside, told us not to go in. But the site manager said if we didn't finish by 11:30, we'd all be laid off. Thomas had a kid in college. I had a scholarship offer from UMass and tuition to save for. We went in. He looked at me then, and his eyes were empty. 11:47. I was at the bottom of the trench laying pipe. Thomas was 10 feet ahead. I heard a crack like a tree branch snapping, but louder. I looked up and saw the east wall start to slide. I yelled. Thomas tried to run. The whole thing came down in 3 seconds. He stopped. His jaw worked, but no words came. I waited. Thomas was buried instantly, Marcus said finally. I got hit by the edge, tons of dirt and rock pinning my legs and lower back. I couldn't feel anything below my waist. I remember screaming. I remember Dennis digging with his bare hands. I remember an ambulance. I don't remember much after that for about 2 weeks. "What happened when you woke up?" I asked quietly. "Spinal cord injury, T10 vertebra, crushed, 6 surgeries, 8 months in rehab. The doctors said I'd never walk again. They were right." He gestured at the wheelchair. I filed a claim with Whitmore Development. Their lawyers showed up with a medical expert who said I'd failed to follow safety protocols and that the collapse was an unforeseeable accident. OSHA's report said otherwise willful safety violations, but Whitmore paid a $75,000 fine and it went away. "What about your settlement?" I asked. Marcus laughed. Sharp and bitter. $50,000. After legal fees, medical bills, and taxes, I cleared about 18 grand. That bought me this wheelchair, 6 months of rent, and a year of physical therapy that didn't do a damn thing. Thomas Sullivan's family got $1.85 million. You know why? Because he died. Dead victims are expensive. Crippled ones, cheap. The words hung in the air like smoke. I felt a cold knot tighten in my chest. I tried to sue, Marcus continued. Got a public defender who took my case pro bono. Whitmore's legal team buried us in motions and depositions. 2 years later, my lawyer told me to take the 50 grand or risk getting nothing. I signed an NDA, a liability waiver, and a statement saying I wouldn't talk to the press. And then I came here and learned to live on $1,200 a month in disability benefits. He wheeled closer, his face inches from mine. So, yeah, Mr. Morrison, the Whitmores destroyed me. They killed Thomas, they paralyzed me, and they paid pocket change to make it disappear. And you know what the worst part is? Nobody cared. Nobody even remembers. I met his gaze. I remember. Catherine Sullivan remembers. Her son, Connor, remembers. And my daughter, she was there that day, Marcus. She was a photographer doing a documentary on Boston construction workers. She took 247 photos, including 17 of Preston Whitmore, standing at that trench 2 hours before the collapse, pointing at it, telling his investors how fast they were moving. No shoring visible, no safety signs. Just Preston Whitmore and his schedule. Marcus stared at me. You have photos, metadata intact, time-stamped, GPS verified, irrefutable. He slumped back in his chair, shaking his head. Jesus Christ, you actually have proof. We do, and we have Thomas Sullivan's work phone. It powered on yesterday after 7 years. We're recovering text messages and call logs right now, but none of it matters if we don't have witnesses. People who were there. People who survived. I leaned forward. Marcus, I can't give you back what you lost, but I can help you take back justice. Real justice. Will you testify? He looked away. Against the Whitmores, they'll destroy me. Again. They already destroyed you, I said. What more can they take? But this time, you won't be alone. Catherine Sullivan, her son, Connor, my daughter, we're all fighting. And we have evidence, not just words, proof. Preston Whitmore standing at that trench, knowing it wasn't safe. Yosta Marcus was silent for a long time, staring at the photograph on the wall himself in mid-jump shot, young and whole and full of future. When he finally spoke, his voice was hoarse. I used to play basketball. I was good, really good. Had a scholarship offer from UMass. After the accident, I watched that dream die slower than Thomas did. Every morning I wake up and can't feel my legs. I remember the Whitmores did this. They did this and walked away. He turned to me. All right, I'll testify. Not because I think it'll change anything, but because Connor Sullivan shouldn't have to fight alone. I stood, held out my hand. Marcus shook at his grip, weak but steady. "Thank you," I said. "Don't thank me yet," he replied. "You don't know what you're walking into." I left Marcus's apartment with a witness and a renewed fury. But I also left with a warning he gave me at the door. "Mr. Morris and the Whitmores don't play fair. Watch your daughter. When powerful people get cornered, they don't just attack, they annihilate." I should have listened more carefully, because the very next day, we would discover that Preston hadn't been sitting idle while we investigated. He'd been preparing a counterattack that would make everything we'd uncovered look like child's play. He'd been planning to destroy Sloane's credibility, her reputation, and her life, and he'd started building that plan 3 years ago. The best lies are built on a foundation of truth. Preston had 3 years to perfect his lie. We had 3 hours to dismantle it before he could deploy it. Carolyn Hayes called my cell at 7 Saturday morning, her voice tight with urgency. "Garrett, we found something during the warrant execution at Preston's office. You need to see this, now." I didn't wake Sloane. Whatever the FBI had uncovered, I wanted to understand it first before bringing it to my daughter. 20 minutes later, I was walking into the FBI's Boston field office on Center Plaza, past security checkpoints and frosted glass doors, into a windowless conference room where Carolyn stood beside a projection screen. She'd aged well since I'd last worked with her 20 years ago, back when I was still with the Bureau, and she was a junior analyst tracking offshore accounts for organized crime. Now she ran financial crimes for the District Gray, threading through her dark hair. Reading glasses perched on her nose, the same sharp eyes that had once caught a mob accountant's single transposed digit in a 100-page ledger. "Garrett," she shook my hand, gestured to a chair. "I'm sorry to drag you in on a Saturday, but you need to see what your son-in-law had planned." "Former son-in-law," I corrected. "Good." She clicked a remote. The screen lit up with a scanned document, a private investigator's report dated March 2021. We executed a search warrant on Preston Whitmore's executive office Thursday, found a safe behind a framed sailing photograph, inside financial records, offshore account statements, and this. I leaned forward, reading. Surveillance report. Subject: Sloane Whitmore. Target: Adrian Foster, 35, freelance photographer and multimedia artist. Duration: March 15th to June 30th, 2021. My blood went cold. Carolyn clicked to the next slide. Surveillance photos. Grainy telephoto shots of Sloane and a young man sitting at a cafe laughing over coffee, walking side by side on a city street, standing together in what looked like a photography studio, examining prints on a light table. Adrian Foster, Carolyn said. He's a commercial photographer. He and Sloane collaborated on a gallery show in 2021, Urban Resilience. Documentary portraits of Boston construction workers. They worked together for 4 months, professionally, platonically. The investigator's final report, she clicked again, concluded, no evidence of romantic or sexual relationship. Subjects maintain professional boundaries at all times. Then why? I started. Because Preston didn't like that answer. Carolyn's voice was flat. She clicked to the next slide. Photoshopped images filled the screen. Sloane and Adrian faces intact, but bodies repositioned, sitting closer, hands touching, gazes intimate. One showed them outside a hotel entrance, Sloane's head on Adrian's shoulder. Another inside a dimly lit room, faces close as if about to kiss. These are fabrications, Carolyn said. Our digital forensics team analyzed the metadata. The originals are legitimate surveillance photos from 2021, but someone we believe a contractor hired by Preston altered them using professional editing software, added shadows, adjusted lighting, repositioned limbs, then printed them, rescanned them to create new metadata, and backdated the files. I couldn't speak. I stared at the images, at my daughter's face manipulated into lies. Carolyn clicked again. Email headers appeared, messages allegedly between Sloane and Adrian, from sloane.whitmore.photo@gmail.com to adrianfoster.art@gmail.com. Date, April 18th, 2021, 11:43 p.m. Subject: Tonight I can't stop thinking about you. Preston is traveling again next week. Can you come over? Another from adrianfoster.art@gmail.com to sloane.whitmore.photo @gmail.com. Date May 22nd, 2021, 2:17 a.m. Subject, no subject. You know I'd do anything for you, but we have to be careful. If your husband finds out, fake Carolyn said, all of them. The Gmail accounts were created in September 2024 last month using a VPN service based in Romania. The emails were composed backdated using timestamp manipulation, then exported as PDFs and printed. Our forensics team pulled the original EXIF data. They were never sent. They never existed until 4 weeks ago. I found my voice. He built a fake affair. A convincing fake affair, Carolyn corrected. Photos, emails, a plausible timeline. And he kept it all in his office safe with a handwritten note. She slid a photograph across the table, a yellow sticky note in Preston's handwriting. Use if S files for divorce. I stood abruptly, chair scraping. That son of a bitch. He was going to destroy her reputation, make her look like the bad guy. Worse, Carolyn said. Look at the legal strategy. She clicked to another document, an email chain between Preston and his attorney, dated October 20th, 2024, 2 days after he'd struck me at the anniversary party. From Preston, Whitmore at Whitmore Dev, com, to, J. Calloway, at Calloway, legal.com, date. October 20th, 2024, 9:14 p.m., subject divorce, contingency, Jim. If Sloan initiates divorce proceedings, deploy the foster materials immediately. We need to destroy her credibility before she can weaponize those construction site photos. Public opinion must turn against her. The grandfather clause won't matter if she's proven to be a liar and an adulterer. My hands clenched into fists. He wasn't just going to use fake evidence in court. He was going to leak it to the press, ruin her career, her friendships, everything. Character assassination, Carolyn said quietly. Premeditated. Not a reaction to her leaving him. This was insurance he put in place years ago, just in case she ever tried. I turned away, staring at the wall, trying to control the rage boiling in my chest. I need to tell Sloan. I know. Carolyn handed me a flash drive. Everything's on here. She'll need to see it. But Garrett, there's more. An hour later, I sat across from my daughter at the Morrison kitchen table, the flash drive between us like a live grenade. Sloan's face had gone from confusion to violation to a kind of cold, terrible clarity. He was going to frame me, she said, voice flat. For 3 years he kept this in his safe, waiting, planning. Yes, Adrian Foster. I barely know him. We worked on one project. We've exchanged maybe 10 emails since then, all about photography gear and gallery contacts. And Preston turned him into my fake lover. To control you, I said. To make sure you could never leave without losing everything. She looked at the printed email in her hands, the fabricated confession of an affair that never happened. This isn't reactive abuse, Dad. This isn't a man who lost his temper. This is a predator who planned every step. A knock at the door. Carolyn Hayes stood on the porch, laptop bag over her shoulder. I'd called her from the truck, asked her to bring the rest. She set the laptop on the table, opened a file. There's one more thing. We found this in his browser history from 3 weeks ago. She turned the screen toward us. Search queries time-stamped October 15th, 2024, 3 days before the anniversary party. How to make fake affair evidence look real. Statute of limitations. Photoshop, fraud. Can fabricated emails be used in court and then dated 5 days ago? October 28th, 3 days after Preston had struck me. Adrian Foster, current address, Cambridge, Massachusetts. Adrian Foster, daily schedule. How to hire someone discreetly. Boston. The blood drained from Sloan's face. I felt ice crawl down my spine. He wasn't just going to use fake evidence, I said slowly. He was planning to hurt Adrian Foster, for real, to make the affair look real. Carolyn nodded, her expression grim. We contacted Mr. Foster yesterday. He's safe. Doesn't even know Sloan outside of that 2021 project. But Preston doesn't know we found this. Sloan stood abruptly, chair clattering backward. What kind of monster did I marry? I stood to put my hands on her shoulders. The kind we're gonna stop. She looked up at me, eyes fierce despite the tears. He was willing to destroy an innocent man, to hire someone to hurt him, to build a fake crime scene around his body, all to discredit me. Yes, What else is he capable of? Carolyn closed the laptop slowly. That's what we're going to find out, and I think the answer is going to be worse than any of us imagined. Guilt has weight. You can see it in the way a man walks. Judge Howard Sinclair carried enough guilt for a lifetime when he knocked on my workshop door that November evening. It was 8 o'clock on Monday night, the kind of cold that seeped through the walls despite the space heater humming in the corner. I was alone in the shop, planning a walnut panel for a cabinet commission, sawdust coating my hands, and the air smelling of fresh-cut wood and linseed oil. Sloan had gone home an hour earlier, exhausted from 2 days spent reviewing Carolyn's evidence files. Tommy O'Brien and his partner were stationed outside in a sedan, part of the security rotation Mitchell had insisted on after Preston's search history turned threatening. The knock was soft, hesitant. I set down the plane, wiped my hands on my apron, and checked the security camera feed on my phone. A man stood on the porch, late 50s gray hair, wool overcoat. No briefcase, no companion, alone. I didn't recognize him, but something about his posture, shoulders hunched, hands shoved deep in his pockets, made me open the door. "Mr. Morrison," he said quietly. "You don't know me, but I know you. I've been following your case against the Whitmores. I have information, but first I need to confess." I studied him, mid-50s, pale, hollow-eyed, the kind of exhaustion that comes from years of sleepless nights. "Who are you?" "Howard Sinclair, Superior Court, Suffolk County." He met my gaze. "I'm the judge Preston Whitmore owns." I stepped aside. "Come in." He sat on a stool by my workbench, hands clasped between his knees, staring at the grain of the walnut panel like it held answers. I stayed standing, arms crossed, waiting. The heater ticked. Somewhere outside, a dog barked. 5 years ago, Sinclair began, voice flat. "My son Marcus was 19, sophomore at MIT. Brilliant kid, full scholarship, engineering major. He went to a party in Cambridge one night, October 2019. Drank too much, got behind the wheel anyway." He paused, swallowed hard. He hit a pedestrian, Jessica Ramirez, 20 years old, Suffolk University student. She was crossing Mass Avenue near Central Square. Marcus ran a red light doing 50 in a 35 zone. She died on impact. I said nothing. Let him continue. Marcus called me from the scene, panicking. I told him to stay in the car. I called a lawyer, James Calloway, one of the best defense attorneys in Boston. Then I drove to the scene myself. I was a judge. I had authority, influence. I used it. His voice cracked. I helped clean up the scene, made sure certain evidence went missing. Marcus's phone with texts about drinking, a dash cam video from a nearby business. I called in favors with the DA's office with the arresting officers. By the time the case went to trial, it was manslaughter with mitigating circumstances. Marcus got 6 months, served 3. "And Jessica Ramirez's family?" I asked quietly. "We paid them. $200,000. They signed an NDA. They were immigrants undocumented. We made sure they understood that fighting us would mean deportation." He looked up, eyes red. "I destroyed them to save my son?" I leaned against the bench. "Why are you telling me this?" "Because Preston Whitmore was there." The room went still. Sinclair continued. "He was at a club 2 blocks from the accident. He saw Marcus leave the bar stumbling. He followed him. He watched the whole thing, the crash, my arrival, the cover-up. He didn't call the police. He recorded it. Cell phone video, photos, timestamps. And then he waited. "For leverage," I said. "Exactly." 3 weeks later, he called me, said he needed legal favors. Real estate disputes, construction permits, liability cases. He didn't threaten me outright. He didn't have to. He sent me one photo, Marcus standing by his car, Jessica Ramirez's body on the pavement 20 feet away. The message was clear: help me or I send this to the state attorney general. Sinclair's hands trembled. For 5 years, every case involving Whitmore development that came through Suffolk Superior Court got favorable rulings. Not just mine, I influenced other judges. Called-in favors made sure the right people were assigned. Workers' comp claims dismissed. Safety violations settled quietly with minimal fines. Wrongful death suits, I buried them. "And Thomas Sullivan," I said. He nodded, face crumpling. "I had jurisdiction. The family's attorney filed in my court. I could have let it go to trial. I could have exposed the negligence. Instead, I pressured the plaintiff's counsel to settle, Told him the evidence was weak, that Whitmore's legal team would destroy them in discovery. The case never saw a jury. And Marcus Webb, same. I made sure his case was assigned to Judge Callahan, a colleague I knew would dismiss it on procedural grounds. Marcus Webb never had a chance. I felt a cold fury settle in my chest. How many cases? 17 over 5 years. Construction accidents, contract disputes, zoning appeals. All rigged, all because I was afraid Preston would destroy my son. Why now? I asked. Why confess? Sinclair stood slowly, pulled off his glasses, rubbed his eyes. Because I watched the video of Preston hitting you. I saw your daughter's face. I saw a man willing to commit violence in front of 400 witnesses because he believed he was untouchable, and I realized I helped make him untouchable. He looked at me, tears streaming. I have a granddaughter now. She's 20, the same age Jessica Ramirez was when my son killed her. I look at her, and I think, a man like me helped the kind of person who would kill a girl like her walk free. I can't change the past, Mr. Morrison, but I can stop Preston from using me to hurt anyone else. You know what happens if you testify, I said. You'll lose everything. Your position, your reputation, probably your freedom. I lost my soul 5 years ago, Sinclair said quietly. Maybe this is the only way to get it back. He handed me a flash drive, small and black heavy, with consequence. Everything's on here. Every case Preston manipulated through me. Every ruling I changed. Every legal barrier I removed. Dates, case numbers, email, correspondence. All of it. I closed my fist around it. This will destroy him. It should have destroyed him 5 years ago. Sinclair walked to the door, stopped, turned back. Mr. Morrison Preston Whitmore isn't just corrupt. He's patient, methodical. He's been building leverage against anyone who could hurt him for years. Judges, politicians, business rivals. If you're going to bring him down, you need to know this. He has files on everyone, and he won't hesitate to use them. He left, the door closed. I stood in my workshop, holding 2 pieces of evidence that could dismantle Preston's control of the legal system. But the judge's warning echoed. He has files on everyone. That meant somewhere Preston had a file on me, or worse, on Sloan. And 2 days later, I would discover that file. It wasn't about blackmail, it was about murder. They say hell hath no fury like a woman scorned. But Eleanor Whitmore wasn't scorned. She'd been silenced for 40 years. That November morning, she finally found her voice. I was alone in the workshop at 6 a.m., the kind of early that belongs to carpenters and insomniacs, when I heard the soft knock. Dawn was just breaking over Dorchester, cold light creeping through the high windows, the space heater ticking as it warmed the air. I wasn't expecting anyone. Tommy O'Brien's security shift didn't start until 7, and Sloan was still asleep at her apartment. I opened the door. Eleanor Whitmore stood on my porch. She looked nothing like the woman I'd seen at the anniversary party. No silk gown, no jewelry, no carefully styled hair. She wore a plain wool coat, no makeup, her face pale and lined with exhaustion. 65 years old and looking every day of it. She held a small leather handbag close to her chest, like a shield. Mr. Morrison, she said quietly. I don't have much time. Nathaniel thinks I'm at my sister's in Connecticut. I need you to take this and use it. She stepped inside without waiting for an invitation, set the handbag on my workbench and pulled out 2 items, a black USB drive and an old cassette recorder, the kind you'd buy at Radio Shack in 1995. I stared at them. Mrs. Whitmore. Eleanor, she corrected. I stopped being Mrs. Whitmore about 30 years ago. I just didn't leave. I gestured to a stool. Sit, please. She did slowly, like her bones ached. I stayed standing, waiting. You have a daughter, Eleanor said. Sloan, I met her at the board meeting. She's brave, strong. She stood up in a room full of men who wanted her to disappear, and she didn't flinch. She looked up at me, eyes red-rimmed. 40 years ago, I was her. Young, idealistic, in love with a man who promised me the world. I married into the Whitmore family, thinking I was marrying into security, into legacy. What I married into was a prison. She paused, hands folded in her lap. Nathaniel hit me once, just once, 1987, 6 months after the wedding. We were at a charity gala, and I laughed at something a colleague said, a man, a professor from Harvard. Nathaniel smiled at the party, charming as ever. But when we got home, he slapped me across the face and told me I'd embarrassed him. I felt my jaw tighten, said nothing. I didn't have a Garrett Morrison, Eleanor continued. I didn't have a grandfather clause. I didn't have a way out. My family was gone, parents dead, no siblings at the time. The Whitmores were all I had, so I survived the only way I knew how I became invisible, silent, obedient, a ghost in my own home. But you weren't completely silent, I said, glancing at the USB drive, a faint bitter smile. No. I started copying documents in 2004, financial records, wire transfers, emails Nathaniel left open on his study computer. He never thought I was smart enough to understand what I was looking at. But I'd been a CPA before we married. I understood perfectly. Every bribe, every shell company, every illegal deal. I saved it all. And I recorded conversations. Dinners with politicians, phone calls with contractors, meetings in our living room where Nathaniel and Preston discussed how to bury lawsuits and silence whistleblowers. For 20 years, I asked. 20 years, she confirmed, waiting for the right moment. Why now? She looked at me, and for the first time, I saw tears. Because I watched Preston hit you. I watched that video. Everyone in Boston watched it. And it reminded me of the night Nathaniel hit me. The same arrogance. The same certainty that he could do whatever he wanted because no one would stop him. Her voice cracked. I saw Sloane's face in that video. I saw her standing there, choosing to fight instead of disappear. And I realized that's what I should have done. She stood pulled. The USB drive from her bag held it out. Preston is what Nathaniel made him. He learned cruelty, manipulation, entitlement, all from his father. I watched it happen. I stayed silent while Nathaniel turned our son into a monster. But I can stop them from doing to your daughter what they did to me. I took the drive. What's on here? Everything. 20 years of federal crimes documented meticulously. Dubai real estate deals in 2018. Money laundering through offshore accounts. A German acquisition in 2012, bribery of foreign officials. The River North rezoning in 2007, payments to city council members. Shell companies in the Caymans, wire transfer receipts, hush money payments from 2005 to 2024. It's all there. I stared at the small black rectangle in my palm. Eleanor, this is enough to put both of them in prison for decades. Why didn't you use it sooner? Her face crumpled. Because I was afraid. And because part of me still loved the man Nathaniel used to be. But that man died years ago. What's left is a monster who taught my son to be a monster. And I won't let them make anyone else suffer what I did. She turned to leave, then stopped at the door. Mr. Morrison, there's one more thing. In that recorder. I captured a conversation 3 months ago. Preston doesn't know. You should listen to it. It's troubling. What kind of conversation? I asked. The kind that makes me certain I made the right choice coming here. After Eleanor left, I sat alone in the workshop as dawn spread across Dorchester. I pressed play on the old cassette recorder. Static hissed. Then voices emerged, muffled but clear. Preston. I need it to look like an accident. Completely natural. Unknown voice. Car accident is cleanest. Cut the brake line. Sharp curve, rainy night. No witnesses. Preston. How long to arrange it? 8. Unknown voice. 2 weeks after you give the word. The recording ended. My hands were shaking. I checked the date stamp on the recorder. September 15th, 2024. 1 month before the anniversary party. Preston hadn't just planned to destroy Sloane's reputation. He'd planned to kill her. There's a special kind of evil in planning someone's death while still kissing them goodnight. Preston Whitmore had perfected that evil over the past 18 months. By noon Wednesday, Garrett Morrison's living room had become an impromptu command center. Carolyn Hayes sat at the coffee table laptop, open encrypted line to the FBI's Boston field office. Mitchell Brennan paced by the window, legal pad covered in notes. Sloane sat on the couch, pale and silent, clutching a mug of cold coffee she hadn't touched in an hour. I stood by the fireplace, Eleanor's cassette recorder in my hand, trying to find the words. Sloane, I said quietly, there's something you need to hear. She looked up. What? I set the recorder on the table, pressed play. Static hissed. Then Preston's voice filled the room. I need it to look like an accident, completely natural. Sloane's face went white. Car accident is cleanest. Cut the brake line. Sharp curve, rainy night. No witnesses. How long to arrange it? 2 weeks after you give the word. The recording ended. Sloane stared at the machine. That's Preston's voice. He's talking about killing someone. Her eyes snapped to mine. Dad, who? I knelt in front of her, took her hands. Sweetheart, he's talking about you. The world stopped. Sloane's breath caught. Her hands went ice cold. No, that's September 15th, I said. 1 month before the anniversary party. Eleanor recorded it. She gave it to me this morning. Sloane pulled her hands away, stood abruptly staggered to the window. Mitchell caught her elbow, steadied her. She shook him off, turned back, eyes wild. He was planning to kill me. Before I could answer, Carolyn's phone buzzed. She answered, listened, her expression darkening. Copy, send everything to my secure drive. She hung up, looked at us. FBI just finished executing the warrant on Preston's penthouse and office. You need to see what they found. She turned the laptop screen toward us. A scanned document appeared. A life insurance policy, MetLife logo, at the top. Insured Sloane Morrison, Whitmore policy. Amount $5 million, beneficiary Preston Whitmore. Effective date, April 12th, 2023. Annual premium, $8,000. 18 months ago, Carolyn said, he took out a $5 million policy on Sloane's life. She was 31, healthy, no risk factors. That premium is unusually high. He paid extra for accelerated underwriting, no medical exam required. Sloane's voice was hollow. I never signed that. You did, Carolyn said gently. Look at page 3. She clicked. Sloane's signature, clear and unmistakable, dated April 2023. He told you it was for estate planning, didn't he? Joint life insurance? Standard for married couples. Sloane nodded slowly. He said it was smart financial planning, in case something happened to either of us. I signed a stack of papers that day, mortgage refinance, Will's power of attorney. I didn't read them all. Mitchell swore under his breath. I felt rage burning in my chest. Carolyn clicked to the next file. This is from Preston's laptop. Deleted files. Recovered by our forensics team. Browser history. September through October 2024. A list appeared. Undetectable poisons. Car brake failure causes drowning statistics versus suicide. Life insurance payout after accidental. Death. How long do accident death investigations take? Route 2. Cambridge accident statistics, below the search history. A series of Google Maps screenshots, Route 2, west of Cambridge, a winding 2-lane road through wooded hills, red pins marking sharp curves, and photographs. Sloane's car, a silver Honda Accord parked outside her studio. Different angles, different days. Surveillance. Sloane turned away, hand over her mouth. Mitchell guided her back to the couch. There's more, Carolyn said quietly. She pulled up a scanned image, handwritten pages in a leather journal. They found this in a locked drawer in his office desk. October 1st entry. I read aloud, my voice shaking. S is becoming a problem. She asked about the Seaport financials yesterday. Too curious, just like Eleanor asking questions I can't answer. But unlike Eleanor S., won't stay quiet. She has Garrett backing her. That damn Carpenter always thinks he's smarter than everyone. I've tried controlling her, tried isolating her. Nothing works. The Adrian Foster setup proves she won't cheat even when unhappy. She's too moral, too principled. That's why she has to go. $5 million is more than fair compensation for 5 years of marriage. The anniversary party will be perfect cover, public celebration while planning privately. Timeline 2 weeks after. November 4th. Route 2, rainy night brake failure. Quick clean. No one suspects a newlywed husband. They'll comfort me. Maybe I'll even cry at the funeral. The room was silent except for Sloane's ragged breathing. She reached for the laptop, read the passage again, tears streaming down her face. He was going to kill me, she whispered. Not in anger, not in passion. He planned it. Like a business transaction. $5 million. That's all I was worth to him, dead. I moved to hold her, but she held up a hand. Wait, Dad. The anniversary party. October 18th. He hit you on October 18th. The realization crashed over her. He was supposed to kill me November 4th, but he lost control on October 18th and slapped you. The grandfather clause activated. Everything changed. The board meeting, the investigation, all of it. She looked at me, eyes wide with horror. If you hadn't put that clause in the prenup, if he hadn't hit you, I would have been, she checked the calendar on her phone. I'd be dead right now, 2 days ago. I'd already be dead. The silence was broken by Carolyn's phone. She answered, listened, her face hardening. Understood. Bring him in. She looked at us. They found the contractor, the man in Eleanor's recording, former Army demolitions expert dishonorably discharged for conduct violations. FBI has him in custody, and he's talking. What did he say? Mitchell asked. Preston paid him $50,000 up front, another $50,000 on completion. The plan cut Sloane's brake line, but not completely, just enough to fail on a sharp curve at high speed. It would look like mechanical failure, no criminal investigation, just an accident report. She paused. He was supposed to do it tomorrow night, November 7th. We stopped it with 24 hours to spare. Sloane stood, slowly walked to the window, stared out at the quiet Dorchester street. When she finally spoke, her voice was cold as winter steel. I want him arrested, today, now. I want to watch them put him in handcuffs. Justice doesn't always wear a blindfold. Sometimes she wears an FBI badge and Kevlar body armor. And on November 7th, 2024, she came for Preston Whitmore. The arrest, November 7th, 6 a.m. Carolyn Hayes let us watch from across the street, off the record, off the books. But she understood we needed to see this. Sloane and I stood on the corner of Federal Street at dawn, cold wind whipping off the harbor, as 3 black SUVs rolled up to the Whitmore Development Tower. 30 floors above us, lights blazed in Preston's corner office. The FBI moved fast. Agents in tactical gear flooded the lobby. Shut down the elevators, swept the building floor by floor. 15 minutes later, the main doors opened. Preston Whitmore emerged in handcuffs, flanked by 2 agents still wearing last night's dress shirt, wrinkled and untucked. Cameras flashed. Reporters shouted questions. Preston scanned the crowd, and his eyes found Sloane. For 3 seconds they stared at each other across 50 feet of pavement. Then Preston's face twisted with rage. "You'll regret this," he screamed. "You'll never—" An agent cut him off, guided him into the SUV. The door slammed. The convoy pulled away. Sloane exhaled slowly, leaning into me. "Is it really over?" "Not yet," I said, "but it started." Across town, Nathaniel Whitmore's arrest was quieter. No cameras, no shouting. FBI agents knocked on the door of the Beacon Hill townhouse at 6:15 a.m. Nathaniel answered in a bathrobe, Eleanor standing silently at the top of the stairs, watching without expression as they led her husband away. The arraignment, November 8th, Suffolk County Court. Preston stood before Judge Margaret, no relation to anyone involved. Carolyn had assured us in an orange jumpsuit, hands cuffed, face pale and unshaven. The charges were read. Attempted murder, Sloane Morrison. Conspiracy to commit murder. Manslaughter, Thomas Sullivan. Obstruction of justice. Judicial corruption. Wire fraud. Bribery tied to Nathaniel's schemes. Preston's attorney, a high-priced Boston litigator named Richard Shaw, argued for bail. "Your Honor, my client is a respected businessman, a pillar of the community, no prior criminal record." The prosecutor stood. "Your Honor, the defendant hired a contractor to sabotage his wife's vehicle with intent to cause her death. He has access to offshore accounts totaling over $8 million. He is a flight risk and a danger to the community. The Commonwealth requests remand without bail." Judge Margaret didn't hesitate. "Bail denied. Defendant is remanded to federal custody pending trial." Preston's face in that moment showed the first crack. He'd believed money and lawyers could fix this. Reality was setting in. Nathaniel's arraignment was identical bail, denied, remanded to MCI Cedar Junction. The trial, February 2025. The trial lasted 3 weeks. Every day Sloane and I sat in the second row of the federal courtroom in Post Office Square, watching as the prosecution built their case brick by brick. Catherine Sullivan took the stand, holding Thomas's old lunchbox dented and faded. Her voice shook as she described the night he died. The settlement that silenced her, the years of watching Connor grow up without a father. Connor read his father's final voicemail to the jury. "If something happens today, this job isn't safe. I'm scared, buddy." 3 jurors wiped their eyes. Marcus Webb was wheeled to the witness stand, described the collapse in clinical detail. The crack, the slide, the crushing weight. Preston's attorney tried to discredit him. "Mr. Webb, isn't it true you violated safety protocols?" Marcus met his gaze. "I followed the foreman's orders." The foreman followed Preston Whitmore's orders. "If following orders to keep my job cost me my legs, whose fault is that?" The jury didn't look away. Sloane's testimony was the turning point. She presented the 247 photographs from 2017 metadata, verified each image projected on the courtroom screen. She read, Preston's journal entry, the plan to kill her. The timeline, the cold arithmetic. $5 million is more than fair compensation. Cross-examination was brutal. Shaw painted her as a vengeful ex-wife. "Ms. Morrison, isn't it true you stand to gain financially from this prosecution? The grandfather clause gave you 15% of..." "I'm not here for money," Sloane said, her voice steady. "I'm here because my husband planned to murder me and call it an accident. I don't hate him, Mr. Shaw. I'm just alive, and I intend to stay that way." Judge Sinclair confessed everything. He'd resigned from the bench before testifying, disbarred himself voluntarily. He detailed 5 years of judicial corruption, cases rigged, justice perverted. "I was complicit," he said. "I enabled a criminal enterprise to protect my son. I'm as guilty as Preston Whitmore, but at least I'm here to tell the truth." He would later be sentenced to 3 years in a separate proceeding. Eleanor Whitmore was devastating, calm, precise. She authenticated every document on the USB drive, 20 years of offshore accounts, shell companies, bribery receipts. The prosecutor asked, "Mrs. Whitmore, why did you wait so long?" "Because I was afraid, and because I still loved the man Nathaniel used to be. But when I saw Preston slap Garrett Morrison, I saw my own past. And I decided no more women will suffer what I did." The contractor, a man named Derek Sullivan, no relation to Thomas, described the agreement. He wanted it to look like brake failure, said his wife was becoming a problem and needed to be handled. He provided wire transfer records, $50,000 from Preston's offshore account. The sentencing. Late February 2025. Judge Patricia O'Donnell, a federal appointee with 30 years on the bench, read the verdict guilty on all counts. Then she spoke. "In 40 years of jurisprudence, I have never witnessed premeditated cruelty of this magnitude. You, Mr. Whitmore, treated human life as a line item on a balance sheet." Preston Whitmore. Attempted murder, 20 years. Manslaughter, 10 years. Obstruction/corruption, 5 years. Wire, fraud, 5 years. Total, 40 years. No parole eligibility for 25 years. Preston would be 62 at his earliest release. Nathaniel Whitmore. Bribery wire. Fraud racketeering, 15 years, at 68. He would be 83 if he lived. Preston was given a final statement. He stood, looked directly at Sloane. "If I hadn't lost control that night, you'd be dead now, and no one would know. I was that close. You should thank me for being human enough to slap your father. That mistake saved your life." The courtroom erupted. Judge O'Donnell slammed her gavel. "Ms. Morrison, you may respond." Sloane stood, met his eyes. "You're right about one thing. Your violence saved me, but not because you're human, because you're predictable. My father knew men like you always escalate. He built that grandfather clause knowing you'd eventually show your true face. You didn't save me, Preston. You walked straight into a trap set 5 years ago by a Dorchester carpenter smarter than you'll ever understand." Preston lunged. Marshals restrained him. Judge O'Donnell ordered him removed. Outside the courthouse, winter sunlight broke through Boston clouds. Reporters swarmed us. I held Sloane close as we walked to the truck. "Mr. Morrison, how do you feel?" a reporter shouted. I stopped, looked back at the courthouse where Preston and Nathaniel were being transported to MCI Cedar Junction. "It feels like justice," I said. "Not revenge, justice." That night. For the first time in months, Sloane slept through without nightmares. But justice, I'd learned, isn't just about punishment. It's about what you build after the monsters are caged. And we had a lot of building to do. They say time heals all wounds. I don't believe that. But time gives you space to build something new around the scars. And on a warm August evening in Boston, among the survivors of the Whitmore Empire, we built something beautiful. The gallery wasn't the old one Sloane had sold. That space severed that connection. This was new, a storefront in Dorchester. Wide windows facing the street, hardwood floors. Sloane had refinished herself. Above the door, a local artist had crafted a phoenix in wrought iron wings, spread flames curling from its feathers. 200 people filled the space for opening night. Not the Boston elite from 10 months ago, but neighbors, artists, construction workers, survivors. Dorchester had come out to celebrate one of its own. On the walls, Sloane's photographs, Series 1, Survivors, portraits of Catherine Sullivan holding Thomas's lunchbox. Connor in his northeastern sweatshirt, Marcus Webb in his wheelchair, hands stained with grease. Judge Sinclair, post-release eyes tired but clear. Series 2, working hands, close-ups of calloused palms, scarred knuckles, the hands of people who built things that mattered. Series 3, broken/rebuilt, abstract images of demolished construction sites. New frameworks rising from rubble, and the centerpiece a massive print of my workshop, late afternoon light slanting through the windows, sawdust floating like gold. Title, Home. I stood beside Carolyn Hayes, her hand warm in mine. She'd retired from the FBI in May, moved into a condo 3 blocks from my house. We'd spent 30 years circling each other. 2 workaholics married to our jobs. Now, finally, we had time. Your daughter is extraordinary, Carolyn said. She gets it from her mother. I touched the wedding band on my right hand, Sarah's ring worn smooth by decades. But tonight in my jacket pocket was a second ring, platinum simple-sized for Carolyn. Catherine Sullivan stepped to the small stage, Connor beside her. The Thomas Sullivan Memorial Fund has helped 12 families this year, she said. Legal support, financial assistance, advocacy. Made possible by the renegotiated settlement from Whitmore Development, $3 million, and donations from Sloane's liquidated stake. Connor added, I'm starting my junior year at Northeastern, studying structural engineering. My scholarship is funded by this memorial. I'm going to build things that don't collapse. That's how I honor my dad. Applause filled the room. Marcus Webb rolled to the stage next his new wheelchair, gleaming under the lights. I'll never walk again, he said bluntly. But I can make sure no one else loses their legs for a paycheck. Safety First Boston launches next month, free safety inspections for construction sites. If you're a worker and something feels unsafe, you call us. We show up, no questions, no retaliation. More applause. I saw tears on faces around the room. I led Carolyn to the back room. On the work table sat a wooden box I'd spent 3 months building, walnut and cherry dovetail joints, hand-rubbed finish. Want to see something? I said. I opened the box, inside on a bed of silk. A platinum ring. Carolyn Hayes. We've known each other 30 years, loved each other for 20, even when we didn't say it. I'm 62 years old. I don't have time to waste anymore. Will you marry me? She looked at the ring, then at me, tears welling. You took long enough, Morrison. I slipped the ring on her finger. We kissed. The door opened. Sloane grinning, followed by half the gallery. They'd planned this. Applause and cheers filled the room. Back in the main space, Sloane took the microphone. This exhibition is called Reclamation. It's about taking back what was stolen, dignity, voice, future. Every photograph here is someone who refused to stay down. She paused, looked at me. With proceeds from tonight, we're establishing the Garrett Morrison Fund. Legal aid, financial support, and advocacy for victims of workplace negligence and domestic violence. Because justice shouldn't only belong to the wealthy. The room erupted. I couldn't speak. Carolyn squeezed my hand. As the crowd thinned, a young woman approached Sloane, late 20s, dark hair falling across her face, shoulders hunched. Ms. Morrison, someone told me you could help. My boyfriend, last night Sloane saw the bruise on the woman's wrist, faint but unmistakable. She took her hand gently. You're safe here. Let me introduce you to some people. She led the woman to Catherine Sullivan, who opened her arms without hesitation. I watched from across the room, Carolyn beside me. She'll be okay, Carolyn said. She already is, I replied. She's not running from her past. She's using it to build a future. Late that night, I stood alone in my daughter's gallery. On the wall, a photograph I hadn't seen before, Sloane and me at the kitchen table, the morning after the anniversary party, holding hands. Both our faces exhausted, frightened, but our hands locked together, unbreakable. The caption, beneath unbreakable. I thought about Preston Whitmore in his cell at Cedar Junction, counting down 25 years, about Nathaniel old and broken, about Eleanor finally free. But mostly I thought about the young woman who'd walked in tonight seeking help, And about Sloane. Ready to give it. That's what reclamation meant. Not erasing the past. Refusing to let it define your future. Some people build empires on bones. Others build futures on hope. I knew which kind I wanted to be. The phoenix above the door caught the streetlight as I locked up. It burned like fire, like a promise, like a beginning. Looking back at this family story, I've learned that God gives us challenges not to break us, but to reveal who we truly are. When family betrayal strikes, whether from a son-in-law's violence or decades of silence, you face a choice: become bitter or become better. Don't be like me. Don't wait 5 years to speak the truth. Don't let fear silence you while evil grows. I built the grandfather clause as insurance, but I should have built courage in myself sooner. Every family story carries scars. The question is whether those scars teach us or trap us. My advice: protect the vulnerable, document everything, and remember, family betrayal cuts deepest because we trust most. But betrayal doesn't define you. Your response does. Choose justice over revenge. Choose community over isolation. Choose hope even when hope feels foolish. This family story isn't just ours. It's every silent victim, every worker whose safety was ignored, every person told their pain doesn't matter. If this story moved you, please comment, share, and subscribe. Your support helps us tell more stories that matter. Thank you for staying until the end. Disclaimer: upcoming stories contain fictionalized elements created for educational purposes. If this content isn't for you, please explore other options that better suit your needs.